Our business requires us to continue. So welcome everybody to the State Route 85 Corridor Policy Advisory Board for this Monday, June the 15th, 2020. And we'll do a call to order and then we'll do a roll call. So, but I'd like to wish everybody that we will be taking comments along the way. And if Thalia can do our roll call, would you please do that for us, please?
Yes. Member Landry?
Here.
Alternate Member Bybee? Member Sinks?
Here.
Saw him. Okay. Alternate Wiley?
Here.
Okay, thank you. Member Bruins?
Present.
Alternate Ennander?
Present.
Thank you. Member Jensen?
Here.
Alternate Spector? Member Luthold?
Here.
Thank you. Alternate Lawler? Member Chairperson McAllister?
Yes, I am here.
Okay. Alternate Clark? Member Camus?
Here.
Vice Chairperson Miller? Oh,
Here.
okay. Thank you. Alternate Zhao? Member Klein? Alternate Fong?
Present.
Thank you. Ex officio Taveras? Alternate ex officio Soleil?
Here.
Thank you. You have a quorum.
Okay, good. Well, thank you, everybody. Before we get into the meeting, I'd just like to sort of give us an idea of how we're going to proceed today. We're going to go first, we're going to do public comment for that particular, as we're required to. We really don't have any minutes to approve. Then we'll go to a committee staff report and then informational item. So when we get to our item number 4, since this is a study session, there are no motions are required. We are to give staff direction, and hopefully we can come to a somewhat of a solid consensus of the direction that we want to give staff. And they will then proceed from there, and then we'll ask for a follow-up on that. We do have city staff joining us today, and I would like to make sure that city staff has the opportunity to speak up. So if you don't raise your hand, and everybody will be raising your hand, I'll reach out to you to make sure that city staff has the opportunity to ask questions and clarify. In fact, I would prefer that city staff ask questions first, because they may, before the PAB ask questions, because hopefully they would be able to, there's been interaction between our staff and the PAB board member, and therefore we could get some clarification and try to streamline the process. Once all the questions have been asked, then we will get back for a discussion roundtable. We will then ask clarifying questions from staff to get a broad sense, get our consensus, and then prepare for the next meeting. So with that being announced, we will go to item 2 on our agenda, public presentations. This portion of the agenda is reserved for persons desiring to address the committee on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are limited to 2 minutes. The law does not permit committee action or extended discussion on any item not on the agenda, except under special circumstances. If committee action is requested, that matter can be placed on a subsequent agenda. All statements that require response will be referred to staff for reply in writing. Board Secretary, are there any public comments?
Yes, it looks like we have 4 members of the public. The order will be Perry, 27 iMac, Linda, followed, and the last speaker will be a phone number ending in 6262. Perry, I'm going to unmute you. Please accept the unmute, and you may begin speaking when you would like.
Hi, I'm Perry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi,
Yes.
I'm Perry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm 16 years old and I live in Sunnyvale. I'm a member of Silicon Valley Youth Climate Strikes, and I'm a current co-lead of the Sunnyvale team with Silicon Valley Youth Climate Action. I believe it would be highly beneficial to move forward with a transit-only option and not add more lanes to Highway 85. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. 27 iMac, I'm going to unmute you. Please accept the unmute and you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Hello, this is Connie Cunningham at 27 iMac. Do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. My name is Connie Cunningham. I'm a housing commissioner here in Cupertino, speaking for myself only. I'm also a member of Cupertino for All, and I've been a resident of Cupertino for 33 years. Chair McAllister and all committee members, I noted they talked about the pandemic. The pandemic will end, the economy will recover, ridership will increase. This is a decision for the future. I urge you to make the decision for alternative 3-2, transit only on the 85 corridor. My personal experience supports this. My son-in-law, who commutes along the 85 corridor from San Jose, also sees transit as the critical choice for moving people. Many low-income residents rely on public transportation. Transit is the most equitable of the solutions presented. I support a station near De Anza College because many students do not have cars. As more housing is added to the cities along 85, private vehicles will become completely unworkable. More lanes, including HOV lanes, have not worked here or elsewhere. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Linda, I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute and you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Yes, hi. My name is Linda Hutchins-Knowles. I'm the co-founder of Mothers Out Front South Bay, and I live in Cambrian, less than a mile from Highway 85. I'm asking that you please do not add more lanes to Highway 84. I'm sorry, to Highway 85, and please move forward with a transit-only option. I'm asking this for 3 reasons: for climate, for health, and for equity. My daughter has asthma. We think it's because she lives near the highway. We are asking for health reasons that you not add more vehicles with exhaust, but instead put public transit in Highway 85. Second, for climate, we need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We need to reduce vehicle miles traveled. In alignment with the fact that the county's declared a climate emergency, as has the city of San Jose and other cities, we believe that your first and top priority should be protecting the climate for future generations. And third, for equity reasons, people who don't have access to cars need to be able to use public transit. And putting Highway 85 and allowing public transit there will be a big boost for connectivity, people who are transit dependent. So please vote for the climate, vote for health, vote for equity, and do transit only on Highway 85. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chair McAllister, we have had some other people, members of the public who wish to speak. Do you, would you like to let them all speak? Would you like to cut off public comment at this time?
No, we can continue.
Okay, just let everyone who wants to speak.
How many
Thank you.
do you have? How many do you have?
I have, it looks like 10.
Okay. And are they all online or are they any on phone?
We've got one on the phone and the others are all online.
Okay, I failed to mention that if anybody that happens to be called in, please press *9 on your phone if you'd like to address the PAB. And so let's continue with the public comments, please.
Okay. The next speaker will be phone number ending 6262. Following that will be Helen, Shiv, and Rayanne.
Hi, this is Roland Brand in South San Jose. I'm not going to be able to join you today because I'm on another Zoom call, and the issue is the 1 p.m. and I guess That's basically is because you need staff on the call, and that's fine. But what I'm asking, though, is that you direct staff to post the link to the video recording so that I and other members of the public, can watch it later. And there is a letter from me in your packet that shows exactly what needs to be done on the VTA website for this to happen. All they got to do is to post a link, just like they're posting links to the board meetings. Now, with regards to what I've heard so far, I understand the concern from the community, but the problem is that we are equating public transit with buses. And there is nothing in there that says, that public transit could be cars for everybody, specifically AVs, automated electric vehicles, which right now, as of this moment, can be deployed on a dedicated guideway. They're not at the point where they can peel off the guideway and start mixing with the other traffic, but they'll get there eventually. So anyway, that's my 2 cents, and I'm sure that your meeting is going to be a lot shorter now that your favorite speaker is not going to be on the call. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland.
All right, thank you. Our next speaker is Helen. I'm going to unmute you. Please accept the unmute, and you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Hi, my name is Helen, and I live in San Jose. I'm with Silicon Valley Youth Climate Strike, and I'm speaking today because I would like to implore you to, again, like many people have said very eloquently before me, please do not add more lanes to Highway 85 because it would raise noise and raise pollution, and we would instead move forward with the transit-only option because I think the whole point of this workshop is to make a sustainable, equitable option that the community agrees with. And, you can work something out to make it work for as many people as possible. And that's why we do not want you to add more lanes to Highway 85. And I thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Shiv, I'm going to unmute you. Please accept the unmute, and you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Hi, I'm Shiv, and I'm part of the Cupertino Youth Climate Action Team. I would like to see transit only and no more extra car lanes on Highway 85 to reduce traffic and to reduce our dependence on cars and to reduce air pollution for the health and safety of the people who live nearby. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Rayanne will be our next speaker, followed by Seema, Eugene, and Jamie. Rayanne, I am going to unmute you. Please accept the unmute, and you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Hi there, my name is Ryan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So as I said, my name is Ryan, and I'm from Hillsborough, California, and my father commutes regularly through Santa Clara County, including on Highway 85. And even given this, I would like to urge you all to not move forward with any options that include more lanes for cars on Highway 85. We all are aware of the concept of induced demand, which will say that as you add more capacity, naturally more cars with growth are going to occupy the roadway and we'll be right back where we started. We will not have improved the situation at all. We will also be increasing vehicle deaths with more cars on the road, in addition to increasing pollution and not moving towards our equity goals and sustainability goals. So I do encourage you all to adopt a transit specific plan that does not add any more lanes to State Route 85. We need sustainable, equitable solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seema, I'm going to unmute you. Please accept the unmute, and you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Dear Policy Action Board members, I'm a member of the Walk by Cupertino board. We are an organization focused on increasing alternative solutions to car usage in Cupertino, and I'm calling today to encourage you to create a dedicated bus lane on 85 both ways. Adding more car lanes is not the solution. It's just a Band-Aid at best. We need to reduce the number of cars on the road and reduce the traffic on C85 as well as all the surface streets in adjacent cities because 85 is gridlocked for several hours every day in the morning and afternoon, and all those cars that can't go on 85 all spill into the neighboring cities and create gridlock and traffic and safety issues in all of the adjacent cities. So for all those reasons, we have to reduce car traffic, and the best way to do that is to create transit solutions. Ideally, light rail would be amazing, but if that's too expensive, then the dedicated bus lanes, I think, is a very good solution. I would also encourage you to make sure that there is a station at De Anza College. It's a major traffic destination in this area, and especially along the C85 corridor. So it's an important place to put a station for these bus lanes. The other issue that I think is really important is several communities in the South Bay, like Saratoga, Cupertino, Los Gatos, don't have any connections to mass transit like Caltrain right now. There's no easy way to get there. If we add a transit corridor along 85, that gives us an opportunity to get there. Those are all my comments. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Eugene Bradley, I'm going to unmute you. Please accept the unmute, and
Hello.
you may begin.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. My name is Eugene Bradley. I'm the founder and CEO of the Silicon Valley Transit Users. Caseman, if you don't know, I now live in Monterey County. Occasionally, I'll take Highway 85 just to do any business that's done up there. One thing that concerned me as I read the attachments, I did not see one example of any project either within Santa Clara County or anywhere else in the world in which adding a lane actually relieves traffic in the long term. That's because there is none at all. I can name several examples where adding a lane actually increases traffic over time, like Interstate 405 in Los Angeles County. That's one example. So that said, what VTA needs to do, consider transit-only options. It is an outrage to find that a public transit agency wants to add lanes when it just declared a climate emergency. Doing so not only, just as previous speakers said, not only compromises your climate change goals, but also it sends the wrong message that VTA is actually creating more gridlock than it was supposed to relieve. So VTA essentially, by doing this, continues to be an agency which just contradicts itself. And that needs to start changing right now. And one of those changes that can be done right now, advise staff to consider transit-only options for Highway 85. And such options not only should include a stop for De Anza College, they should also include a stop for Good Sam Hospital, because these are places in which people go all the time, and that could definitely use more transit options than what's available now. That will be for another discussion. So in summary, please advise VTA staff to consider transit-only options. Adding more lanes just adds more traffic. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Eugene. Jamie will be our next speaker, followed by Juliet, Cole, and Kagarg. Jamie, you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool, thanks. I'm Jamie. I'm a Mountain View resident and co-lead of Silicon Valley Youth Climate Strikes. I'm like all the people who've spoken before me. I'm also calling to ask you to not add more lanes to Highway 85. As it's been stated before, it doesn't reduce traffic and public transit does. So it seems like the clear solution to me. And I mean, looking at the climate emergency that's been declared, people my age are really worried about climate change for good reason. This is a very serious issue for us. And so I think my entire generation would appreciate all of the efforts that you can put into increasing transit. I know that, we're just one area and the whole world really needs to put their weight into this, but every little bit counts. So thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you. Juliet, I'm going to unmute you. Please accept the unmute and begin speaking when you are ready.
Am I audible?
Yes.
So good afternoon, Policy Action Board members. I'm a high school student, a resident of Cupertino, and a teen liaison with Safe Routes to School. And I urge you today to make the recommendation to move forward with creating new dedicated bus lanes on CA 85 in each direction for public buses, preferably including a station on Stevens Creek Boulevard. I've seen so many cars cutting through Cupertino in an effort to avoid gridlocked Highway 85. Adding more car lanes isn't going to help. I visited my sister who attends UCLA, and even though they have 6 or 8 more lanes, their traffic is impossible. The only way to help improve our traffic is to look at walking and biking more or using public transit. These bus lanes will encourage more use of public transit where people need to commute, such as from South San Jose up to Mountain View and Northern Sunnyvale. Locally, there are many De Anza College students that would benefit from this as well, especially if a station was added. A station not only means that people can get on and off the bus quickly, but it also doesn't slow down current traffic. This is a modest proposal, significantly less in cost than having a more desirable light rail path along the highway. Employer buses such as Apple and Google can even pay fees to use it. The cities west of San Jose have waited too long for such a small step, while we watch San Jose enjoy increased BART service and light rail projects. It's time to move forward to make this area livable for residents living here now, and for people like me that want to in the future. Please vote to move the dedicated bus lane project forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliet. Cole, I'm unmuting you. Please accept the unmute, and you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Cole Cameron out in Cambrian Park next to Xilinx. I bought this house right before they actually started digging 85 or finishing it. So I've watched the increase in noise and traffic since it's really close to the intersection of 17. As many other speakers have spoken already, I'm really interested in having us not add another lane. I think the 405 example, when I go down to see my nieces in Orange County, is a great example of many that more lanes don't help. They just increase congestion, not to mention the pollution and all that's involved with our environment. So thank you for the time this afternoon and bringing this committee together. And I look forward to a vote that's going to improve mass transit in our valley. Thanks again for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Cole. Our next speaker will be Kay Garg, followed by JR, Eric, and Jason. Kay Garg, I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute, and you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Good afternoon, PAB members. My name is Krithi Garg, and I'm a member of Cupertino for All, and a 24-year resident of Cupertino and the South Bay, currently living less than a mile from 85 and De Anza College. I would like to urge you to not move forward with any of the options that include more lanes for cars on 85 and instead focus on public transit investments. Study after study shows that adding more highway lanes simply induces more traffic congestion, increasing emissions, and lowering quality of life. To build on previous comments about equity, I'd like to add that the significant impact this could place on youth without access to cars or parents who have the time and flexibility to drive them around. And these youth rely on public transit to access school and work as well. Mentioned previously, De Anza College is a key hub of educational opportunity in our region that is also facing a declining enrollment. What would it look like for VTA to be part of the solution to multiple problems by creating a dedicated bus lane on 85? We need to build towards a future that revolves around transit-oriented development and mitigating climate change rather than complete car dependence. This is one of many small ways that we can work towards that future. Please consider a transit-specific plan that does not add any more car-centric lanes to 85. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. JR, I am going to unmute you. Please accept the unmute, and you may begin speaking when you're ready. JR, are you there?
Why don't you go to the next person and see if JR comes on later.
Okay, very good. Eric, I'm going to unmute you. Please accept the unmute, and you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eric Lindskog. I'm a resident of Cupertino. I'm on the Cupertino BPAC as well as the VTA BPAC, but I'm speaking here as myself. I would like to urge you to not add any new car lanes along 85. I think it's pretty clear that our environment cannot afford it, and adding more car lanes will simply generate more car lanes that are stuck. Hardly an improvement. Rather, we should add a lane dedicated for transit. This will be obviously more environmentally friendly, and also provides an opportunity for fast bus service, something that's not always available otherwise. And it seems fairly obvious that it should include a station at Dianza College and Stevens Creek Boulevard, as this can be expected to be a major destination. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to try JR again. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Ah, excellent, much better. All right, I don't want to belabor the point too much, so I'll echo most of what my friends in other organizations have said. My name is JR Fruin. I'm a third generation resident of Cupertino, and I was a founder of Cupertino for All. We've had a couple of comments already, but I lived in Los Angeles during undergrad, and I will tell you that accessing opportunity when you don't have a car is next to impossible in a place like that. And we really shouldn't be following that model for the development of transportation here. It really would be sad if we expanded 85 without taking note of the fact that we really need to do something for transit along that corridor. We are going to see a lot of housing and jobs expansion over the next 10 years. Much of that will continue in the West Valley, and people in South San Jose and further afield should not be locked out of that opportunity merely for want of a car. Thank you.
Thank you, JR. Our next speaker will be Jason, followed by Richard and Neil. Jason, I have unmuted you. Please accept the unmute, and you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon, directors. Thank you for your service on this board for a very long time for a lot of you. This is Jason Baker, Vice President of Transportation and Housing for the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. And I would like to speak in support of continuing to do analysis on a transit option. I think the letter from the city managers has a number of good points about some of the shortcomings of VTA's report, including that it doesn't take into account the effect and the benefit of demand from private shuttle riders. And we are happy to work with VTA staff on getting that information. We've worked with VTA staff before on getting information about station preferences. That staff can call me, and I will see if we can get that information. But also, frankly, staff could have provided information about at least estimates, high-low estimates based on their shuttle counts they already had. And that could have helped inform the board about general estimates of what effect private shuttle ridership would have. In addition, the report reads, frankly, to me like a little bit of a snapshot in time and fails to take into account some of the work that's being done at Plan Area 2050 and at MTC to project increase in ridership because of increase in growth in housing and jobs in this area. And also, frankly, because of the work MTC is doing on some of the very issues that were mentioned, I think, on page 5 of the report as impediments to a transit solution. Things like increased charging for lanes, and MTC is charging ahead on that effort every day. And so those sorts of things will change in the future. As will the fact that a transit alternative will help induce some of the things that VTA staff is concerned about, induce density and growth around the stations. That's the argument VTA makes for other transit systems, and that's the argument they should consider here. Thank you.
Thank
Board
you.
Secretary, before we go to the next public speaker, Board Member Camus needs to take off, and so I'd like to give him the opportunity to present a few of his ideas. Board Member Camus, could you go?
Yeah, thank you for making this special allowing me to speak. I apologize, but the meeting for the city council was moved, the budget meeting for city council was moved till this time, and I have no way to say no. I've been serving on this committee and VTA for many years, and I can tell you that the people who passed Measure B want to fix congestion. They were not looking for solutions that are far-fetched. They just don't want to stay in their car, for hours on end without a solution. And that's why they funded this tax, quite frankly. So I'm not a big believer that adding a lane, and I'm supportive of a transit lane in some way. But I am not a believer that if you add a lane that necessarily traffic will come. Traffic will come because jobs are coming and housing is coming, and housing is not coming where the jobs are. And that's the biggest reason why people travel, because they live far from their jobs. And as long as cities don't produce enough housing, people will get on the highway. This is why we need the expansion of Highway 85. And I think it would be a disappointment, at least to the taxpayers, if we don't start concentrating on ways to reduce the congestion. We are a congestion management agency after all, and this 385 million was set aside to relieve congestion. And I'm hoping that this could be the focus of the way we think. We are not going to convince people to get into buses necessarily. And I would love to hear how many people are actually getting in buses to go to Google or Yahoo or whoever is using buses these days. I think that telecommuting is going to help some with congestion, but we need to plan for the future. And as long as cities don't produce enough housing next to them, we're going to need to add lanes. And that's just a fact, unless we want people to sleep on their highways. Anyway, I appreciate your time. I have a staff member that's going to be following along in the meeting and listening to the observations. So I apologize for my early withdrawal here.
Thank you, Member Camus. Save some money from Mountain View when you go over there. Or there you go. Okay, Board Secretary, could you bring back the public, please?
Yes. Our final three speakers will be Richard, Neil, Monica, and we just had one more pop in hung, and then we will cut public comment off. We just had two more people join for public comment. Would you like to let them speak, Chair?
Yeah, cut it off after them.
Okay, so Nassim will be our final speaker. Richard, I'm going to unmute you. Please accept the unmute, and you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Richard Mellinger. I am chair of Sunnyvale's Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission. I am also chair of Livable Sunnyvale, our local pro-growth and housing, pro-housing, pro-transit advocacy organization, although I am speaking here today solely on my own behalf. I would urge you to adopt the transit-only approach for the expansion of the Highway 85. I grew up in Long Beach, next to the 405. It's the 405, by the way. I have spent far too much of my life parked on the 405. They widened the 405, traffic got worse. Any highway widening project you care to look at makes traffic worse. The effects of induced demand are extremely well documented at this point. There's the line from Einstein that insanity is trying to do the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Widening SR 85 for more cars is not going to solve the congestion problem. Furthermore, it makes a mockery of the idea that we have declared a climate emergency. If we're serious about stopping global warming, about reducing pollutions, about cleaning up our air, what we need to be doing is we need to be providing transit. We need to be providing clean public transit. If we're serious about equity, if we're serious about inclusion, we need to make sure that people can get around this valley without a car. And to speak to Councilmember Camus's comments, if you want to reduce congestion, the way to do it is to reduce the need for people to drive. If you widen SR 85, you will only have more traffic, more pollution, more carbon emission. This is a 20th century solution to 21st century problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Neil, I'm going to unmute you now. Please accept the unmute, and you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Good afternoon, VTA Policy Advisory Board. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. My name is Neil. I'm a long-time resident of Cupertino. I'm also the chair of Cupertino for All. I'm also 23 years old and a recent college graduate, and I just moved back to the area. I dedicate all of my work hours to community organizing and most of my recreational hours to also bettering our community, to create more cohesion, inclusion, and empathy. So that is the place I'm coming from today. But unfortunately, even though I want to do so much for our area and the hometown I grew up in, I am at a crossroads. I am deciding right now if this area actually wants me, if I should leave. My car broke down recently and I don't have the funds to replace it, but I also frankly don't want to replace it. I don't like driving. I want to live in a city that is accessible with or without a car. I don't want to live in a highway rich area. And once COVID-19 restrictions dissipate, I will need transit to get around everywhere. But the Bay Area has also made it clear everyone should be expected to drive, damn be the high number of car casualties, the emissions, or the thousands of poor people who don't have access to a vehicle. But fortunately, we have some options here. We can stick our heads in the sand and pretend that more and more cars make sense, or we could actually think about adding in dedicated transit along SR 85. So young folks like me or your younger or lower income folks can actually have options to get around. We could send a signal to the area that we want to bring in and retain more people like me. And I ask that you please be mindful of this narrative when moving forward, regardless of what staff reports seemingly conclude. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Monica, I'm going to unmute you. Please accept the unmute, and you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
My name is Monica Mellon. I live in Cambrian Park, and I'm part of Silicon Valley Youth Climate Action, and I'm also on the Cambrian Community Council. And like most of the speakers here, I want to urge you to not move forward with any of the options that would include adding more lanes, and instead go with the transit-only option. We've invested billions of dollars in building and widening highways and roads over the years, and although it may not be clear now, before shelter in place, traffic was worse than ever before because, unlike Councilmember Camus, I believe in induced demand. I think that even without knowing all of the details and studying all of this in a master's program, we can all agree that traffic has gotten worse even though we've been investing in these highways and in these roads. So again, I really want to urge you to choose one of the transit-only options and also consider charging tech shuttles to use the transit-only lanes to generate revenue to operate VTA Express buses or whatever the technology is at the time in these lanes. I really think that we need to make sure that these corporations are paying their fair share and that we actually have the funding to operate transit on State Route 85. So please think about our future. Please think about making sustainable choices that will benefit the younger generation, because we are going to have to deal with whatever you decide to do for the rest of our lives, and so will people that aren't even alive right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
John, you.
Yes, ma'am.
Nope. I'm
Well,
sorry.
John, yeah,
Public
John-
speaker.
John Gee. Yeah, John
Yes.
Gee. Yeah, okay.
Yes. I'm unmuting you. Please accept the unmute, and you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Hello, VTA board members. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm John Geis, a longtime resident of Cupertino for over 20 years. I am also a member of Cupertino for All. I urge you to not add more lanes to Highway 85. I advocate transit-only options. Please don't be short-sighted and just add more lanes. Adding lanes for automobiles is not the solution. As you know, 85 is the main artery for the Southwest Silicon Valley area, which is starved for transit options. BART and other mass transit options are just not present here. So we need options other than more lanes and more cars and more carbon emissions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Nasim will be our,
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
that's okay. Nasim will be our final speaker. I'm unmuting you now. Please accept the unmute and you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Thank you very much for having this discussion. My name is Nasim Nouri. I live in northern San Jose. I do use 85 quite often. I am a city council, the Green Party of Santa Clara council member. And as you would expect, I am a huge supporter of clean, efficient, and sustainable public transportation. But this discussion is about far more than our climate. It is about equity. We expect our transportation leaders to actually lead in the area of public transportation and solving traffic and accessibility issues. Why would we choose to follow old failed policies that have led in so many other municipalities and areas to, frankly, more traffic, more pollution, and also less equitable solutions for transportation? I am here to urge you for the transit-only option and taking the responsible route in using the public finances that are being entrusted to you for providing solutions that actually serve us. Requiring someone to own a car and pay for the insurance and repairs when people are struggling in this economy, frankly, is unacceptable. If you've been on the road recently, you realize that COVID-19 may have changed the way all of us, including most businesses, see transportation. I hope that these empty roads stick around as long as we need them to, and further beyond that, because we are changing the way we are using roads, and you need to follow us in this case. You've heard the request and the expectation of the public. So I urge you to go with a transit-only solution and dispel with all the other options that have failed us so many years. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll close public comment now. Those who haven't had an opportunity, you could please send an email to the city, to the board secretary, and they will forward it to us.
John, excuse me, but I mean, for those public members who haven't spoken, they would have an option to speak in one of the other items, right? Not to discourage the public.
Oh, I don't want to discourage, but Rob, the reason I wanted to hold off on this is because this committee has been inactive for the last 6 months or more, and I want to get to business. And so they have the opportunity, as I say, to send some information to us.
I understand.
Email right now.
Do they have the option of weighing in on one of the next agenda items, or are we done?
We're going to be done right now unless we get done sooner. But we got to take care of our business. And so to sum up, what I hear from basically the public giving comment right now was that they want a transit dedicated lane and not adding more lanes for cars. So. And there was a large consensus on that. So I have a feeling that if anybody else added on, it would probably be along those lines. So we will move on.
Other question.
Rod, please. Can we
I'm just wondering if we are recording this for the benefit of the public. I'm concerned about transparency. Every other agency does. I'm wondering if VTA is recording this or not.
Yes, VTA is reporting it. They are putting it on YouTube, and they are going to try to transition it. They're having a little trouble transitioning the recording to YouTube, but they're working that out according to the board secretary. So this will be available.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. And I know other people have asked that question too. So we will go to item number 3, committee staff report. And then I believe our public our director will be speaking. And then once we give our committee staff report and then Adam gives his report, I would like to go to city staff to ask questions and then board members to ask their questions. So Deborah, welcome aboard. Glad to see you. And we will go to your committee staff report.
All right. Well, thank you, Chair McAllister. And for those of you on the PAB that I have not met before, my name is Deborah Dagang, and I will staff this committee moving forward. I'm the Director of Planning and Programming and also the CTA Director for VTA, and I started with VTA last September. I have worked in the Bay Area in transportation my entire career, both in planning and traffic engineering. And also wanted to mention that not only did I grow up in San Jose, but my parents bought their first house in San Jose near Camden Avenue because they heard easy freeway access was coming soon. And then after we moved to West San Jose, and after I started college, I actually used Route 85 to commute to work when I was home from college during the summer. So a little bit of history here. I did want to just mention that at today's workshop, as Chair McAllister stated, we are going to present the alternatives analysis for the SR 85 Transit Guideway study. We are holding this as a workshop with city staff because we want to hear all the various perspectives and questions and priorities and what the different cities in the corridors feedback on that. We do not have an action item at this time for a PAB recommendation, and that was always the plan to do it in this order, was to present the alternatives analysis, hold the workshop, and then get the feedback from you and then develop that recommendation. One point I wanted to emphasize, since it's been a little while, is this is funded by Measure B, which is estimated to be $350 million over the 30-year life of Measure B. However, I do want to caution that that was pre-COVID, so if our sales tax dollars go down, that could be affected as well. And that there's really three uses for that money. Noise abatement, which there's a separate study about to start, a transit lane project, which is this study. And then the third area that was mentioned was congestion relief. Nothing on that has started yet by this PAB. It could include anything from pricing to multimodal projects to technology improvements. So just wanted to lay the groundwork there. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, folks, I did make a faux pas here that I cut off public comment on the public part, but to Mr. Sink's point, it is correct. I will open it up for item 4, so I apologize for that. Was there any public comment on item 3? Okay, seeing no hands raised, we'll move it to item 4, and that we will do the SR 85 Transit Guideway Study Alternative Analysis. And as I say, we will go through the staff report, and then we will allow public comment after the staff report, and then we will go to city staff for their comments and then the PAB. So we will begin with this staff report, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair McAllister. I'm Adam Berger. I'm a senior transportation planner at BTA, and I'm the project manager for the Transit Guideway study. Can we go to the next slide? So as mentioned, the format of today's meeting is a workshop. I'm going to give a quick presentation on the findings of the alternatives analysis. Then we'll have a period of time for clarifying questions from the Policy Advisory Board, and then we'll want to get you into your roundtable discussion as soon as we can. Next slide. So in this analysis, we looked at 14 different alternatives. We started with 9 different physical configurations for the corridor. And for some of those, the transit lanes and the bus on shoulder lanes configurations, we looked at 2 different transit routings. So that's how we get to a total of 14 alternatives. Now, for simplicity and brevity in this presentation, I've grouped them into these 4 categories, and I'll talk about them in those groupings. No change will be pretty self-evident. That's no changes from what we have today. That will be our baseline scenario. So all metrics that we present will be compared against the no change. For the express lane scenario, we are imagining express lane rules that are a little bit different than we have today, but that we think will be in line with what would be in place at the time this project could be constructed. Those would be 3 or more people per car would access the lane for free. 2-person vehicles would access the lane by paying half the entry fee, and solo drivers would access the lane paying the full fee. For the transit lane alternatives, we're envisioning that would be open for public transit use as well as private shuttles. The idea being that we want to encourage travel in space-efficient ways with high-capacity vehicles. And for bus on shoulder, it would be the same access as the transit lanes, with public transit and private shuttles being eligible. However, because it is technically shoulder operations, there would be some restrictions on the speeds that could be achieved and when vehicles would be allowed to enter those lanes. Next slide. So this is alternative 1.1. It looks pretty similar to what we have today. And I'd like to just go over this schematic quickly because we'll be looking at a lot of these during the presentation. we have, for simplicity's sake, broken Highway 85 into 3 different sections. What you see on the left side of this slide with the north of I-280 label is the portion between 101 in Mountain View and 280. This is the older, narrower, more constrained portion of the corridor. In the middle of the diagram, labeled 280 to 87, that is the section that has the wide median that is currently undeveloped. And on the right, the south of Highway 87 section goes from 87 all the way to 101 in South San Jose. This is the section that has light rail on it presently and generally experiences a lower degree of congestion than the other 2. Next slide. So this is our first express lane alternative. And this is simply looking at converting the existing HOV lane to an express lane, not adding any more lanes. This alternative is something that we assume would happen regardless of what alternative is pursued through this project. And so you'll see that every alternative that we look at after this builds on top of this concept. Next slide. Alternative 2.2. This is the alternative that was advanced in 2015 through VTA's Silicon Valley Express Lanes program. This would convert the existing HOV lane into an express lane and build a new express lane between 280 and Highway 87. Next slide. And then alternative 2.3 looks at taking that farther, bringing the express lane all the way up to 101 North in Mountain View. Next slide. So to summarize, what all of these show is in alternatives 2.2 and 2.3, which are adding additional express lanes. The added capacity results in increased vehicle miles traveled and commensurate increases in greenhouse gas emissions. We are not imagining a transit service operating on the corridor for this alternative, and so that column is blank. We believe that shuttles operating on the corridor would see a small speed improvement based on the evolved rules regarding using the travel lane that should allow for more optimal flow. And we've listed capital cost estimates there. Those are escalations of numbers put together in the 2015 environmental impact analysis for this alternative. I will note that express lane projects are not an eligible use of Measure B dollars for this Highway 85 pot of money. And so any express lane element constructed as part of a project or in its totality would be funded by a source outside of Measure B, likely state grants. Next slide. So the transit lane alternatives, the first one we looked at, alternative 3.1, is a short transit lane between 280 and 87. This would allow just public transit and private shuttles. Next, 3.2, long medium transit lane, extended the transit lane all the way north of 280. Next, and alternative 3.3 was looking at whether there was a benefit to right side transit operations. And this comes with a little bit of operational complexity. Because vehicles enter and exit the roadway on the right, they would interact with this transit lane, which could impede the free flow of transit vehicles and shuttles to some extent. But it could have some benefits also in that having side running stations could be less expensive than median stations, and private shuttles that want to access the transit lane but may only be on the freeway for a short period of time wouldn't have to cross all lanes of travel just to get over to the transit lane and then back again. Next slide. So we looked at 2 different routing options for these transit alternatives. The first, routing option 1, is a direct routing. It goes from the Mountain View Transit Center to the Ohlone-Chenoweth Light Rail Station, and it serves 4 inline freeway stations at El Camino, Stevens Creek, Saratoga, and Bascom along the way. Those stations would be similar to what exists on Highway 87 and 85, where there is light rail in the median today. This is the most direct routing, therefore has the fastest end-to-end travel time and most time competitive with automobiles. Next slide. We also looked at a routing that would allow the bus to get off the corridor and go to some areas that we think would be high drivers of ridership: De Anza College, West Valley College, and Good Samaritan Hospital. Now, the trade-off here is that the less direct routing means that the end-to-end travel time is slower, which would be a negative in the minds of some travelers, but it comes with the access trade-off. It also has a benefit that the transit stations at De Anza, West Valley, and Good Samaritan already exist, so those wouldn't be part of the project cost. Next slide. So taking it all together in this very large table, want to point out that routing option 1 metrics are in columns 2, 3, 4, and 5 on this chart. while routing option 2 metrics are in 6, 7, 8, and 9. And the general summary across both options is that there would be very little change to vehicle miles traveled. That's because we're not adding any additional capacity for automobiles. However, we also think that the transit ridership that we would be able to achieve on a public transit service would be quite low, peaking a little over 5 boardings per hour of service. And VTA's minimum standard for transit productivity is 15 boardings per hour. So this would be well below that. And that leads me to think that under current policies, VTA would not be able to justify operating a transit service on this corridor, which would mean that a transit lane would be used by private shuttles instead, which is a fine option to pursue if the Policy Advisory Board wants to go that direction. And we may also want to consider removing some of the stations to save a little money if the private shuttles wouldn't be using them. The shuttles would be able to go at 65 miles per hour in a pretty reliable, unconstrained lane in these alternatives. Next slide. We also looked at bus on shoulder operations. Alternative 4.1 mirrors the transit lane in 3.2. Next slide. And alternative 4.2 mirrors the transit lane alternative in 3.3. In both of these cases, next slide, we get similar outcomes as the transit lane alternatives, but less benefit to buses and shuttles as they would be limited in how fast they could operate to about 45 miles per hour traveling on the shoulder. And they wouldn't be able to access that lane until travel speeds degraded below 35 miles per hour. Next slide. So I recognize that given the high volume of traffic congestion on the corridor, there probably was an expectation going into this analysis that we would find high levels of transit demand. And instead we have these relatively low ridership numbers. And I wanted to take a few slides here to go through some of the reasons for why those ridership numbers are coming in lower than perhaps expected. One of the challenges we have, and here we're revisiting the routing 1 direct option, is that we have a limited number of stations along the corridor. Those circles on the map aren't just the locations of the stations, but they also are the 1/3 of a mile catchment area around each station that we imagine we would draw ridership from. With only 6 stations, we end up with 30 different origin destination pairs, which is a pretty small number for a transit route. It means that trips that start in some of those dots would also have to end in some of those dots. And that makes for not that many trips in total that fit that qualification. Next slide. The other challenge that we face is that not all stations along the corridor are transit supportive. Now here's an example of a very transit supportive station. This is downtown Mountain View. That dotted line circle that you see is the 1/3 of a mile catchment area around the station. And we find that people can walk and access quite a few locations from the station. While there's no hard and fast rule about how far people are willing to walk to access transit, a 1/4 of a mile or about a 5-minute walk is generally understood to be standard in the field of transportation planning. When the service is high quality, something like Caltrain, people are willing to walk a little further. So we've expanded that to 7 minutes. And what we see is that not only can you access lots of locations in downtown Mountain View due to the grid network that exists there, those locations are generally pretty dense and they're pretty varied in their land uses with housing, employment, retail, dining, things that create demand throughout the day. And that's great for public transit. Next slide. On the other hand, we have some areas, and this is the Saratoga station area, that don't have a lot of density, don't have a great walkable street network that provides direct connections. And these are areas where we would struggle to get a lot of transit ridership, but it just was not designed to be transit supportive, and retrofitting it to try to put a transit service in there doesn't yield a lot of promising results. Next slide. One other thing to mention is that because we have this suburban urban form in Santa Clara County, we end up with a many-to-many travel pattern, which is not where you want to be when designing a successful transit service. We would love to see lots of people in one location going to another location. And so what I'm going to show you in the next few slides is mapping that we've created of where people are going based on mobile device location data that we use as one of our data sources. In this case, I've selected zone 28 of the zones that we analyzed, which is the Fruitdale, Pruneyard, Cambrian area. If you go to the next slide, you'll see where trips that start in that zone are ending up. And what we would love to see for a successful Highway 85 transit service is lots of big bold dots right along the corridor. The size of the dots correlates to how many people are making that trip to those other zones. And it just really goes all over. Next slide. We did the same thing for the zone that is included in downtown Mountain View and the area slightly northwest. Next. We also see a similar pattern that people who are going to or coming from that area are really coming from all kinds of other locations without a strong concentration along the Highway 85 corridor. Next slide. So as I was preparing for this meeting, I was able to talk with 8 of the 9 cities staffs or cities along the corridor, talk with their staffs, and some of them asked what could be done to encourage transit ridership. And we put together this list, but it really falls into 3 different categories. One category that determines high ridership is the quality of the transit service itself. This is a 15-minute all-day bi-directional service, which is about the best that VTA is able to offer in its network. The other factors we want to pay attention to are the urban form. How dense is the land use around the station? How walkable is it? What's the variety of land uses that are in that area? That's something that is really within city control, since cities have land use authority. And also the third element that affects transit ridership are the incentives around using modes. Transit's automatically at a disadvantage because it has penalties associated of accessing the station, accessing your destination, and waiting for transit to arrive. To overcome those, we generally need some stronger incentives. So things like limiting the supply of parking or charging for parking, or even using some sort of pricing mechanisms, maybe making it more expensive to enter an area if you arrive by car, but free to enter if you arrive by transit. When you put those sorts of incentives together, along with good land use and a high quality service, you generally get pretty good transit ridership. But we don't quite have all 3 of those coming in strongly in this case. Next slide. And so that's my last slide. I'm happy to take any clarifying questions from the Policy Advisory Board, and then would like to get over into the roundtable discussion. Thank you.
Okay, before we get started into the questions, I'd like to again correct that I made a mistake, and I would like to allow public comment to start. Board Secretary, how many people do we have? I see 2 hands already for public comment, so let's begin with public comment, and then we'll go to city staff for questions.
Thank you, Chairperson. Our first speaker will be Hung, followed by Roberta. Hung, I'm going to unmute you. Please accept the unmute, and you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Okay, thank you very much. This is Hung Wei. I am a 40-year resident of Cupertino, and I also served on the local high school, Fremont Union High School District Board for 11 years. Thank you for the opportunity. Actually, my name was on the first comment, but I wasn't called, but I'm so glad to get another chance. You know, every student, 10,000 plus students in the Fremont Union High School District learns history. Why? Because we want them to learn from history, to not make the same mistakes. Adding more lanes has not worked in the past. It will not work in the future. We need to design 21st century transportation. And what are the options? I heard about equity, but for people who have cars, for people who don't have cars, the haves and have-nots, we all need to change our driving habit. Single lane driving is not going to be encouraged because it's not good for the environment. It's not going to solve our future transportation issues. I urge the VTA to look far ahead and plan. All the challenges I heard about ridership challenges, those can all be worked on, challenged. Look at this COVID-19. We learn, we adapt, we learn new skills. Our students, our future does not need one more lane. We need future clean, fast transit for the haves and for the have-nots. Look into encountering challenges and meet them face up. Adding more lines is not an option because it has not worked in the past. It will not work in the future. So I urge your board and the VTA to really look into the 21st transportation. Give us clean, fast transit, and we'll take it. Thank you.
I would like to, before we do it, I'd like to remind our public that they will be commenting on item 4, and if they could keep the topic to item 4 would be appreciated. Go ahead, Board Secretary, bring on the next.
All right. Roberta, I'm going to unmute you. Please accept the unmute, and you may begin speaking when you're ready. Roberta?
Okay.
There you go.
Now, okay. Thank you very much. I'm Roberta Holloman, and I'm representing the Leagues of Women Voters of Santa Clara County. The Leagues supported and endorsed Measure B in 2016 because it had comprehensive solutions for our growing transit and congestion issues across all of Santa Clara County. We were specifically solicited to endorse Measure B, and I was the signer of the ballot measure. We expect VTA to move forward in good faith on all of the projects embodied in Measure B, including comprehensive, effective, and long-term solutions for State Route 85. We know the advisory group and VTA embrace good government and would expect nothing less than this in this process. And I also want to say that we were pleased that Measure B passed with a 72% vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta. Our next speaker will be Eric, followed by John. Eric, I am going to unmute you. Please accept the unmute.
If you wanted to speak earlier in item number 2.
Yes. Hi, this is Eric Lindskog, a resident of Cupertino. I'd like to comment. I mean, it was mentioned in the presentation here that it was kind of put a question: what can we do to increase people taking public transit? And I think that's one thing that's pretty clear. The one thing we can do to not increase it is to build another car lane or 2 more car lanes. So clearly this must be the worst solution. And keep in mind that we're building something for the future, and people will follow what we build. So if we build car lanes, we will get more traffic. If we build transit, we will get more transit. It's as simple as that. And we should really choose transit for the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. All right, John, I'm going to unmute you. Please accept the unmute, and you may begin speaking when you're ready.
This is John, long-term resident of Cupertino. I spoke earlier, so I'll keep my remarks short. Regarding the transit option projections, good study. It looked like it was all assuming current statistics and data. As someone said earlier, we're building for the future here. And assuming current densities, it's going to change. And transit-oriented hubs are much more likely to be with us. So let's also include those incentives for use that were outlined as well. DTA is just one of many ecosystems of entities, and we all need to work together to build a transit artery for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to the city staff. I'm going to call the cities in alphabetical order, and they may speak and make their comments, ask questions. Staff will be taking notes and will answer the questions at the end. We do ask that each city try to limit their comments for all of them, all members, representatives of the city staff, to 5 minutes. We will go ahead and start with Campbell. You can unmute yourself. Do we have anyone from Campbell?
Yes, this is Todd Capurso from the Public Works Department, City of Campbell. Am I coming through?
Yes, you are.
Okay, very good. I appreciate that. Just wanted to just make our comments known that we also have some sensitivity toward the whole VMT analysis. And as individual cities, we're obviously moving toward the implementation of SB 375 and being quite a bit more sensitive to construction and development that minimizes increases in VMT. In fact, we're probably going to be encouraging those that will contribute to an overall decrease in VMT. So I think the notion of adding lanes and adding to VMT is something that we would probably all have concerns about, although I can only speak for Campbell at this point. Just a little bit also of concern with regard to the corporate buses. And I do think that there is a lot of promise there. Just a little bit of concern that in some cases, in some of the West Valley cities, we have seen experiences where there can be unintended consequences of loading and unloading type areas on that. So I think that's something that I don't know that that's an overly large negative, but it is a concern that we need to be aware of. So as we encourage more corporate buses, I think we do need to be aware and cognizant of the areas that we would encourage what you might call the park and ride opportunities. And I will stop at that point. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Up next will be the city staff from Cupertino. I believe we have 4 of them present. You may unmute yourselves and go ahead and speak.
Okay, well, thank you. I don't know if all 4 of us will speak. Definitely myself and Senior Transportation Chris Corio will be speaking. I'm Roger Lee. I'm the Director of Public Works for the City of Cupertino. And effective, efficient, and economic transit is key to building healthy, equitable, and sustainable communities. The City of Cupertino and other West Valley cities have a vested interest in transportation projects and want to work with VTA to make Measure B a success on Highway 85 and to respect the overwhelming direction of voters. Similar to the many public comments received this afternoon, Cupertino strongly supports a transit solution, not simply additional lanes of traffic. West Valley cities and the public only recently received the study that has been provided by VTA, and Cupertino requests this study session be continued after today and to occur prior to September, and only after the PAB has heard further deliberation, then make a recommendation to the VTA board no later than September. I do have 2 questions for the Policy Advisory Board, and one of them is it 352 million, that alternate 3.2, is it inclusive of stations? And if so, what type of stations are envisioned in the study? And secondly, is VTA open to public agencies and or private partnerships to help build these stations? So with these remarks and questions, I would like to now introduce Chris Corio, Senior Transportation Manager with the City of Cupertino. Thank you.
Thanks, Roger. Can everyone hear me okay? Good afternoon. My name is Chris Corral. I'm with the City of Cupertino. And I first want to start out by thanking VTA for leading this process, and specifically Adam Berger for all of his work and being extremely transparent with all of the cities. It's made the process a lot easier. I'll also want to say that I think Cupertino, as well as most other cities along this corridor, have a very deep vested interest in transportation and would like to see Measure B become a success, as transportation really is the conduit to building sustainable communities. Following up on a lot of the other similar comments made, we see that the times really are showing us through the transition to VMT as a statewide measure, AB 32, SB 375, and SB 747, that really now more than any other time in recent history, are we presented with an opportunity to embrace transit and get the Bay Area out of single occupant vehicles. Specifically, speaking to the study now, I see I have 3 minutes, so I'll try to be quick. We do have some concerns about the study as a whole. The real purpose of this transit guideway study was to study transit alternatives in our eyes, to guide the investment of $350 million of Measure B. And that the specific language of Measure B itself calls for a transit lane. And the purpose was really around transit infrastructure and studying the merits of different transit infrastructure alternatives. It appears when reviewing the study that there is a concern on the part of VTA as to the operational cost and an assumption that VTA would operate a service when the actual measure itself really is silent as to who would operate a service. I would also like to mention that it's been brought up many times, the concept of induced demand. And Adam mentioned in his presentation that when a transit line is very high quality and high speed, that the transit walk shed can increase, but the induced demand of a very high quality transit line can be far greater. I think Caltrain is a perfect example. You have people in areas that are going far greater distances to get to what is a high quality, high speed route, because that's the only realistic way they can get to work. Another part of the study that we have an issue with is that we think that the study is analyzing existing conditions and not really aware or cognizant of the future conditions that are really spelled out through the MTC and ABAG long-range planning documents that bring more density, more people, more jobs all to the West Valley and to Silicon Valley as a whole. And then most importantly, we feel the analysis doesn't adequately consider the potential for high capacity shuttles that are private in this lane for both congestion relief, the ability to generate significant ongoing revenue, and providing a controlled environment for potentially the testing of autonomous transit vehicles. And we all know that for transit, the labor is the most costly aspect, so that working to leverage those partnerships with the private sector is key. So to conclude, I'll wrap this up. From our vantage point, a cohesive transit system is necessary for any part of the system, the transit system, to work well in San Jose and in Silicon Valley and Santa Clara County. The study in its current form is not assessing and comparing the opportunities that are present, and appears to be influenced by concern over operational costs. So that summarizes all of our remarks. And again, thank you.
Thank you.
Adam, could you answer the two questions about, does the cost include the stations, and could cities partner up with VTA to put in and pay for the stations?
Sure, I'll take the last one first. We are always welcoming the private dollars. If we can make those connections, I'm happy to explore that possibility. Regarding the stations, could I ask Roger to reference which alternative he was looking at? I didn't catch that as I was writing my notes.
Adam, it would be 3-2.
3-2. So we are looking at inline stations for the routing option 1. And for routing option 2, we would have an inline station at El Camino, but then we would have off-corridor stops at the De Anza College, West Valley College, and Good Samaritan stations. And we're imagining that those would be connected to the corridor by direct transit ramps.
And Adam, to clarify, and those costs, both of the stations of the direct connector ramps, are included in the estimate.
Correct. The cost of the station and the cost of the direct connector ramps are about equivalent. So they're included in the total costs you see in the documents we presented.
And I'd like to remind, thank you, remind city staff that we're trying to move along a little bit, but if you had questions or comments, please respect the 5 minutes so that we will get to our board members. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Cupertino has worked with 3 other West Valley agencies on a letter that will be going to the board later today with Los Gatos, Campbell, and Mountain View. And if it would please the commission, we do have a rendering of what a Stevens Creek Boulevard station could look like, but I do understand you're pressed for time.
Yes, you could gladly email it to the rest of us and we'll take a look at it.
Thank you.
Okay. Next city, please.
Do we have any city staff from Los Altos? I don't think I saw any. Nope.
We do have, sorry, this is Jeannie.
Go ahead.
We do have city staff, and I'm not sure, and just so you know, it's Jaime Rodriguez. So he may not be wanting to comment at this point, but I may pull him in when I comment.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Do we have any city staff from Los Gatos? No. Okay. Monty Sereno.
The City of Montessorino doesn't have any comments or questions at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. City of Mountain View.
Hello, this is Ria Hutchbarrett-Lowe. I'm the Transportation Manager for Mountain View. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you very much to VTA for your efforts to plan for the future of transit in Santa Clara County. In Mountain View, we're fully supportive of efforts to enhance future transit, and we've also invested in addressing congestion and prioritizing the most space-efficient modes of transportation as well. For example, on Shoreline Boulevard, we're building transit lanes in order to provide travel time savings for those who are using different types of transit, as well as private shuttles along our most congested corridor to the highest employment area in the city, which is the North Bayshore area. Measure B specifically calls for the study and implementation of transit infrastructure such as bus rapid transit, light rail transit, and future transit technology along the 85 between the 87 and the 101. The Measure B language remains agnostic on the issue of the operating mechanism or the implementing agency. And I have 5 questions. First of all, why was the evaluation focused on VTA services and not long-term transit infrastructure? Secondly, how was the decision made to assume that VTA alone would be the operator of the service and not some combination of VTA, public-private partnerships, and high-capacity shuttles? Thirdly, why were the options for future transit infrastructure evaluated against the VTA's traditional fixed route service criteria? Why were express lanes included in the analysis when they're not eligible for the Measure B funding? And fifthly, why was the corridor of analysis truncated at the Mountain View Transit Centre and not extended to the 101 and the North Bayshore destinations as directed in the Measure B language? We agree that building transit along the 85 is part of creating a truly regional transit network that works for many-to-many trips by people throughout the Silicon Valley. And in this study, the priority should be really to get the infrastructure in place so that we can achieve those many-to-many trips. Additional stops could be added in the future, and we would also expect that different operating mechanisms could be implemented in the future as well. And we really look forward to working towards an effective, a visionary, and a sustainable transit network. Thank you.
Adam, did you get those 5 questions?
I think I've got 4 of the 5, so I can take a shot at addressing them, and whatever I've missed, Ria can catch for me. Regarding the question about why did we assume the VTA transit service would be in this corridor? From the past 2 years of discussions, we've been talking about VTA transit operating in this corridor. So that has been my impression and reinforced over time. We are certainly welcome of other services to use the corridor as well. Municipal services would be welcome in, and private shuttles have always been identified as a potential user of the corridor. When it comes to partnering on private-public partnerships, this is an area that VTA has just recently gotten into. The revision of our transit service plan late last year and the new express bus network is our foray into partnering with private entities to serve long distance trips. And it's a place where we could potentially do a lot of growth at VTA. As for the fixed route along the corridor, this was the bounds of construction. And so we imagined the service operating between the Ohlone Chenoweth Light Rail Station and the Mountain View Transit Center, although there's nothing that could stop a routing from going beyond. In fact, if we choose to pursue a transit direction, when we get into the project stage, we could look at many more varieties of routing north of and south of the corridor to pick up passengers. I'll turn it over to Ria. What did I miss?
Why were express lanes included when they're not eligible? And I guess the other one was the criteria, the fixed route criteria versus considering different types of transit.
Sure. So for express lanes, that originally wasn't on our plate to look at on this, but the Policy Advisory Board in past meetings had requested that we include it so that they could have it as a point of comparison. The background for this study is that VTA had been pursuing just an express lanes project, and the West Valley cities asked us to look more broadly. So it's in there as a point of comparison, not as something that would be funded by Measure B or this pot of money.
Did you get them all, Rhea?
And the service criteria. So did you answer that one?
Service criteria along what lines?
Versus considering, looking at criteria that's based on services and current services of VTA and kind of the algorithm that goes with that versus really looking at it in terms of transit infrastructure. Why the focus on the services?
I'd consider this in two parts. We have a capital cost related to infrastructure, and we've presented that in the memo with all the stations and the dedicated lanes for transit sections. We also, imagining that the VTA transit service would be expected to operate in the corridor, did a transit analysis. I'm hearing from the comments from the cities today that those two don't necessarily have to be attached to each other, that you could build a transit lane and not operate a VTA service in there, and that would be a fine outcome for some commenters. And that's certainly on the table. That's something we would look to the Policy Advisory Board to provide direction on.
Okay. Okay, next city.
Next is the city of San Jose. Do we have anyone who wishes to speak?
Yes, this is Zaire. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. This is Zaire Guzada, City of San Jose, Department of Transportation. I wanted to thank VTA for this report. We look forward to working with you, with VTA, as well as all the other cities on completing the analysis needed to get to a positive outcome. No other comments, no other questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So, what, Sunnyvale or Saratoga?
Saratoga, if we have anybody. I don't think we do.
Okay.
So we'll skip over to Sunnyvale.
Any public staff? Any staff questions?
Does not look like it. So it's being turned over now to the PAB and roundtable discussion.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for that, staff. I appreciate that. The reason I went to staff beforehand because I did want to hear their input. Last time we sort of cut them a little bit short. And second, I think they're sort of an extension of VTA because they do have some expertise that would be helpful as we go forward. Okay, I will, if anybody would like to raise their hands, I will go with that. Do I see a hand from Jeannie Bruins wanting to speak?
I'd be happy to lead off, Chair. So first of all, I want to say thanks to staff for all the work and all that went into this. And you definitely threw a lot at us. And unfortunately, we all did not have that time to really kind of deal into the nitty gritty. But I think what happened for me is after reading through this, and even my staff person who is new to 85 and such, I asked him to look at all of this with a fresh set of eyes. I did not try to bias him in any way. I mean, Adam, you were witness to what the limit of what I did say. But you know, when I look at this, I kind of scratched my head and said, maybe the Policy Advisory Board, maybe what we did not do really well was getting a clear definition of what problem we're trying to solve, okay? But when I go and look at the report and I listen to all the comments, and particularly, you know, some of the comments, you know, made by members of the public as well as staff and such, if I were to define the two problems we're trying to solve, and I'm going to say this because this is the lens that frames how I'm looking at this, is problem number one is that we have a commute time congestion problem. Okay, that is strangling those that are stuck in the traffic. And it leads me to problem number 2, which is, as communities along the corridor, we're having a difficult time being able to preserve the quality of our communities because of cut-through traffic. So for me, I'm looking for a solution that will deal with commute congestion and one that deals with the cut-through traffic and the impact that it has on communities. As Los Altos, who's closest to the end of this, if you go south to north at the end of this and the closest to the job centers, we really feel the impact, okay? But we hear, even Cupertino feeling like they've got the same kind of thing. So when I look at this, I'm going to tell you where my head is at. I want to look at 3-2. However, when I look at 3-2, I want an option 3, okay? And that is, let's move away up front from looking at a transit system. The transit system has multiple stops, it's got multiple stations, it's trying to do all this collection and trying to move everybody, from different points of collection to different points of destination. And I think that goes away from the commuter congestion problem. And I think, Johnny Camus, before he left, he says, he really thinks this is about fixing congestion. And again, that's during the commute. So if we look at and stay with a 3-2, but instead of trying to move forward up front and get ourselves kind of twisted around the axle, we really need to look at where do we have the most effective pickup points, and look at this as more of a long haul transit that we're talking about. Similar to what you have when we look at, there's a bus that goes from Santa Cruz to San Jose. It doesn't stop at 99 different places along the way. It deals with a long haul. VTA does fund part of that. VTA also has a bus service that actually originates in Fremont and deals precisely with just commute congestion. It's a service, I don't believe, that runs all day, but it deals with moving people out of another county and moving them and bringing them in with a direct service for get them to our job centers, okay? If you look at above us, if you look at Alameda does the same kind of thing. They run a kind of a long haul, an express bus type of service from Alameda going across over into San Francisco. None of those are really looked at in terms of a transit where you have multiple stops. It's not what our traditional bus routes are. So I would like us to look at that and trying to figure out where's that collection point to the south of us, i.e., which is really the residential, it's not the job centers, it's more residential. And how do we get us to the job centers? So I'd like to ask that we're, in terms of next steps, is can we look at where would those morning commute pickup points be, 1 or 2? If you look at VTA, your staff report a collection point being like Chenoweth, okay? I would say, can we eliminate everything from Chenoweth up to some point up higher up? But I would also look at whether or not we need a collection point. Again, looking at it from a congestion point of view, not just an infrastructure point of view. Do we also need a collection point in terms of the Morgan Hill Gilroy arena as well? And then the question becomes, now what are the drop-off points with that morning commute? Where do you go? VTA, you put in the Mountain View Transit Center. So it's my next steps. I would prefer to ask that, can we look at, can Sunnyvale and can Mountain View take a harder look in terms of where can that point be? If we're really talking about a commute service that has a long run, uninterrupted, where would it go so that it can fan out? Does the transit center in Mountain View make sense for people to get off and then get on something to go to job centers in Sunnyvale? That might make sense for Mountain View. Does it really have to go all the way up, or does it connect in there to go up to North Bayshore? But it also takes us beyond Mountain View up into Palo Alto, up toward Facebook, because it allows you to do another connection there. I would also like us to really look at, when we're talking about a transit lane, okay? And for the members of the public, remember 3.2 has convert our HOV to an express lane and then add a transit lane, express lane. In that one, I guess I want to look at it in terms of, yes, some sort of public transit, but I agree with all the speakers who have spoken. That can be done by VTA, but it also could be outsourced. Okay, there could be a different delivery model because VTA's model isn't really tuned to deadheaded type of service. Corporate shuttles would also be allowed on that, and I do agree that that should be something that we should be charging for. And I also think there's a third type of commuter that could be in that transit lane that I think we should entertain, which is the true organized van pools. So not talking about the passenger vehicle, the individual passenger type vehicle that might have, 3 people in it. I'm talking about a true van pool that has greater than that number. In terms of the stations, again, I think I've already said, I would like I don't have the data and maybe there is hard data. While it feels good to maybe consider things like Good Sam, De Anza, et cetera, without knowing exactly where they're coming in, again, looking at this as solving a congestion problem, I don't know if those stations are necessary for this to be successful, but I definitely don't want to do anything that preclude them. And again, I support what we've heard from some of the staff people in terms of, let's say, if Cupertino says, no, there's a real need on the 85 corridor during that congestion period to have a station there to get, so we can get off to De Anza. There's nothing that says that the individual cities can look at trying to get creative in that funding and how do we get funding to do that. So I would not like to see us preclude any of that. In terms of operational cost, again, I think by looking at this, if you think of this as part of a routine fixed route type of solutions that we have, the metrics will never pan out in terms of operational costs, which is why I think we need to look at it a little bit more broadly and looking at whether, is there a different metric that we're using and do we outsource this? The other thing is I really think we're at a point now, and I think several of us on the Policy Advisory Board will be finding our terming out. And so it really is nice. And I'd like to see something go to the VTA board in terms of a decision. And I agree. You said September, I think, Cupertino. I was looking at October. We're basically in the same ballpark. How do we get to something that is, let's be more pragmatic about this, which is why I say, let's strip out maybe these stations in between. This is not a transit solution. It's a commute. We're giving a commute alternative. The other way of badging this, or the way I look at it, it's a shuttle bus for the rest of us. If I'm not on a Google bus, an Apple bus, a Facebook bus, a Genentech bus, whoever else's buses are on here, this is kind of the equivalent for everybody else. Those buses don't go and stop in all kinds of places. They have collector points. We don't know exactly where they all are, but they don't go all over the place the way we would do our fixed route kind of system. The other reason I'd like to look at this and ask the cities to consider the reduction up front in terms of this and not preclude it is because as we look at this money, I think it's going to take time, if we can get this in place, to get people to treat this and ride this as if it were a shuttle bus for the rest of us. And I would rather see our money, I don't know if our money is allowed to also be used toward making a transit solution successful. That is doing marketing, that's doing whatever we need to do, including if that means initially having a higher subsidy on this, if we are operating it through VTA, so that we have enough time to build the actual ridership. For ridership to grow, one critical piece is the free flow of that transit solution. If I'm sitting in traffic with everybody else, it doesn't work, which is why I really would like to see this transit lane happen. I think pragmatically, if it means during non-commute times, it's open to everybody, that's fine. I'm not as concerned about that, but I really think we need to get something that allows us to move masses of people. The Caltrain analogy is good. That's always been considered a commuter rail, and it's after umpteen years where it's more than just a commuter rail because we're seeing traffic going in, the volumes going in both directions and not just one direction in the morning and one direction in the afternoon or in the evening. I think I'll leave comments there.
Thank you. So we're going to go to Rod Sinks, then to Howard Miller, and then other people would like to speak. Raise your hands, please. So Rod?
Thank you, John. You know, I really appreciate how you've conducted this meeting. I appreciated that you reopened for public input. I think we had to do that. And I am encouraging that you know, we post this online because I think with all the public's interest and the fact that we have operated in some obscurity, I think it's good at this time when we're coming to a decision that we really allow the public to understand the conversation we're having, what we've done, what the data is, and then have an opportunity to weigh in. And to that end, just on the last point, I do think waiting till October is dangerous. We've seen constant delays in the queue up for this. I would hate to see this not come to the board before those of us who have worked on this for 5 years are effectively out of office or lame ducks. I think it's important that we get this to the board. So I would move for I'm not making a motion. I would suggest we have a vote and schedule a meeting, plenty of lead up time, a vote in September. And then I think it would be also appropriate to, somebody mentioned this, to have a meeting in between where we have a chance to spend more time, because, you know, we've had a weekend to look at all of this data, bring more public voices to the table, and, you know, have an opportunity to hear from folks. I think that would be good public process. That would be the transparency I would seek. Now, as for what I'm looking at and what I prefer, I would say I agree with Jeannie that 3-2 is a great option. I am more interested in stations than Jeannie, however, and I'll just make my case for the rest of you to think about. You know, you mentioned Gilroy and Morgan Hill. Gilroy has 55,000, Morgan Hill has 43,000, but South and West San Jose, you have 457,000 people. We've got to consider the fact that in the next RENA cycle, San Jose, with its vast area, will be building oodles more housing. Cupertino in this RENA cycle had 1,064 units allocated. In the next cycle, we're looking at somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000. So we are all going to be building a lot more housing. And I think, to the point of the speakers, we need to look to the future. If South and West San Jose currently has 457,000, how could we serve those folks with a system? I think a collector at Chenoweth is essential, as Jeannie said. I would also say, though, that you have a lot of people commuting across the hill every day on 17. So a station at Bascom makes a lot of sense, because from there, if you get off that bus and you want to go to Mountain View, that's going to be a really efficient way to do that. I don't know, frankly, about Saratoga. You know, Howard, I'd leave it to Howard to talk about whether that makes sense. I don't know, but I know that De Anza College is big. We have people coming from all over the area, from South and West San Jose. It is a major transit destination. I think we can talk till we're blue in the face about data, but I just know this to be true. And I think this is reflected in VTA's own ridership statistics for De Anza. We also, by the way, have a major Apple office complex on Bub Road, just to the west of that interchange. A lot of the software is developed there. So actually, you know, Cupertino is also a major employment center. Tomorrow night at council, we're considering extending our priority development area into the Bub Road area at our council meeting. And we have Apple otherwise, right? So I started this, and I'm finishing here soon, but I started this thinking that we all needed to put a lot more housing in. Cost of housing in San Jose is about half of what it is in my city, maybe a little less. folks like teachers and service workers need a way of plying this corridor without the infuriating hour-long drive, which is what it is. And if we can't provide that by some means, then I have no interest. So I think it is essential that we get some transit service. But to the point that Cupertino staff and Mountain View staff made, this is about transit. This is about building transit infrastructure. And I do think over time, either VTA will serve this or we will get together a JPA of cities to do it ourselves. We've got to. We can't continue with all the surface streets. We've got to decongest the corridor, which means effectively, the surface streets, which essentially means adding much more capacity. If we add a lane for cars, an express lane, I think the official number is 1,300 something cars per hour. That's not even one tech campus's worth of capacity. We need a high density solution that will grow with us and look toward the future. I think those are my comments for now. And I'm very interested to respond to whatever anybody else's thoughts are. Thank you.
Before I go to Howard, then Mason after that, Adam, did you give us, you hear there's a concern to move things along. So do you have a timeline for the next meeting that we would have? Did you anticipate 2 meetings or just 1 meeting to come up with a formal recommendation?
Well, officially, September 28th is our next scheduled Policy Advisory Board meeting. But as chair, you always have discretion to schedule other meetings, and we've done that in the past. So if the Policy Advisory Board wants to get together and have more discussions before then, we are happy to do that. We will be here for technical assistance, but this recommendation is now in your court. So we want to do what we can to help you move it along at the speed you're comfortable with.
So after we get all the input from the city staff and the board, PAB members, and say you'll digest it, how much time do you think you need to do that? If we say, let's say, this is June, we say we like to meet in August, then meet in September. Is that realistic for you to get that data to say in August?
I'll wait to hear from all of the other Policy Advisory Board members to see how many promises I can make as my list grows. But so far, I've given myself action items of get in touch with Jason Baker to see what we can do to learn more about private shuttles. From hearing Jeannie's comments, I think we can rely on some historical data to talk about the express bus model that she described. And then I would like to do a follow-up with city staff about the plan development that cities have near station areas so we can better incorporate that in our analysis. I think I could get all that done and presented probably within, a month or so. So if there's more, we'll see.
Okay, but I just want to make sure that if you give us a date, we hold to that date. So thank you, Adam. Okay, Howard Miller, then Mason, and please, other members, raise your hand so that we can get your input. It's very important in this. Go,
okay.
Howard.
So I got some data that I want to talk about in response to a lot of stuff that members of the public have brought up. But before I say that, I gotta at least jump out and say I'm supportive of option 3-2. Okay, I think that's probably the best space to land in. With respect to my community, the closest single where a person would live is over a 5-minute walk from that intersection. And so an in-corridor station in Saratoga is virtually meaningless. But we have a transit center at the college, and I get that it's off the freeway. We get 7,000 to 9,000 people going to and from there a day. So we would certainly love to see that be the nexus in Saratoga. So the data I wanted to talk about is what's going on in terms of the corridor, right? We got the spaghetti diagram that gave us, the 1.9 million trips a day. And we know that only 4,000 trips originate south of the 101-85 intersection that go to north of the 85-101 connection, right? So the data showed that the average trip was 2 exits on the freeway. So we kind of know what the use patterns are out there. And so I'm not sure that planning long haul is like reflective of the way the corridor is being used. I want to talk about induced demand for a minute because the freeway carries 100,000 vehicles a day on the 3 lanes through Saratoga. And I don't know how many people are in each car, but let's just say it's one, but 100,000 vehicles a day. When Highway 85 went in, it cut all the traffic in our surface streets, and Highway 9 was cut down to below 12,000 cars a day. It's now up at about 40,000 a day. So the induced demand, if you put a lane on the freeway, is going to be taking all these cars off of our surface streets that are already there. The second thing is I want to mention carbon. If the environment matters, if clean air matters, then we need to abandon transit altogether, right? If you count all of our bus system, all of our light rail, all of our express, and all the boardings of Caltrains in our county, you come up with 109,000 daily boardings, right? That is less than the daily boardings and vehicle miles traveled for the electric cars that have been sold in the last 5 years in our county. And the rate of electric car penetration within our county and within our state is growing on the equivalent of one light rail, entire VTA light rail system per year. And so if carbon really matters, if climate change really matters, we should be adopting policies that promote rapid movement from gasoline vehicles to electric vehicles, because that's what's already happening in the world. In terms of land use, you know, when you look at the West Valley, it's a very complicated area to serve. If you look at Saratoga Avenue, there is nothing within a quarter mile of that location that isn't already built zoned residential. Okay, we got one 10-acre parcel that's between a quarter and a half a mile from that spot. We are building a massive, Rod will appreciate this, a massive SB 35 project a half mile from that intersection with 91 units, right? The level of densification in my area is very small. If you work your way up and down the corridor, there was a request for the hospital area. It's sort of the same thing. That area is either built out or already planned at relatively low densities. I know Rod Deardon Sr. mentioned that we would all be getting 40-story buildings if we really wanted to see density, but I don't think Cupertino is going to even put 10-story buildings across from De Anza. So we have the reality of our corridor being relatively affluent, relatively low density. The future plans of even adding, you know, thousands of housing units per city does not densify this to the level where it's like, you know, nowhere near Manhattan, but nowhere near downtown San Francisco or San Francisco in general, places where transit is being successful in the Bay Area. And so I really think that a lot of the arguments focused around environment are wrong. If the environment mattered, we would be doing everything possible to get diesel trucks and diesel buses and gas vehicles and all of that off the road. And what do we see in BTA? We've delayed our electric vehicle purchases because we've had to move that money to other projects. That's not the way to solve the environment. If we're looking for equity, if we're looking for accessibility, if we're looking for a way for normal people to get around, then we got to come up with a viable transit alternative. So I know many of the climate people have talked today, and I really think that you got to switch your argument, because if carbon mattered, transit is not your answer, because the data shows that. I am kind of a little beside myself because almost 2 years ago, we said we wanted to include the corporate shuttles, and I don't know what happened, but by this point, we should have some data. We should have communicated. We should have reached out. So I don't know where that ball got dropped. But I can't remember a meeting where we didn't say we wouldn't have a solution that include corporate shuttles. And everybody's got that data, right? In 2016, the Bay Area-wide corporate shuttles was 35,000 daily boardings. And the data that I've seen indicates that it's probably tripled since then. So we're looking at the corporate shuttles in Santa Clara County of being more than our light rail and our express bus systems combined. So to say oh, maybe someday we'll think about corporate shuttles is totally backwards. They're an integral part of the way people are getting around. And I think when you do that, to Jeannie's point, and maybe to John's point, it does change where you want our stations to go. Because if the corporate shuttles had to get off short of the Mountain View Bayshore, you know, they could still drive over there within a couple of miles. It's the corporate shuttles for the rest of us locations that matter. Worrying about where Google is or Apple is or Facebook is when they already provide this service and their employees already write it. We're not helping new. And I don't want to be in a situation where subsidizing Facebook, Google, or Apple. I'd rather that they be subsidizing the transit on the corridor. And then I'm sure everybody saw it, but nobody really mentioned it. The prices per boarding, which I saw someplace in the report, you know, $40 a boarding, $45 a boarding. We got to figure out a model where that is subsidized, or we change the structure of what we're running out there. I don't know how we change that number, but $45 a boarding for a solution doesn't sounds like Eastridge all over again. We got to figure out a way to have efficient and effective transit out there. Oh, and then I can't leave without the Saratoga perspective, right? And I'll say this, you've all heard it. Highway 85 cut through my city in the most dense part of the city, diagonally across the largest axes of my city. And of the 30,000 people in Saratoga, 20,000 people a day continue to hear the freeway. The freeway's noise is in excess of what the original environmental impact report said. And so we continue with the perspective, if we're going to do anything out there in the Guideway, please let's change the material to reduce the noise impact on the 2/3 of my citizens that are impacted every day. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Howard. We have Mason, and then we have Marcy and Sean and Susan. If you guys would like to get in the queue, we'd be glad to hear from you. So Mason.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, staff, for the great presentation. So I'll just start off with some questions, and then I'll get to my final comments. So this question was asked before, but I wanted to go into detail, if staff can, about the $350 million breakdown of Measure B. How much has this study cost thus far? What is the cost breakdown per station, or how is the cost of the stations worked into the budget of this project? When, for example, in option 3-2, you have a budget of $352.3 million. And for the budget part, does that include operations, the additional cost to maintain, or is that just the capital projects to build this project out with the transit routing option 1 or 2? And I can feel free to, if you need me to repeat any of those.
I'm happy to take a shot at some of those. So of the $350 million for Measure B, we had originally set aside $1.6 million to cover the cost of this study. However, because of the lawsuit that was placed on Measure B, we ended up funding the first $400,000 from Measure A. So this has cost us $1.2 million, and in fact, our consultants have come in substantially under budget. So we're at about $900,000 now in invoices for this work. There is another $200,000 that's been covering staff labor and some of the outreach activities that we've done. So altogether, about $1.1 million spent so far on Measure B dollars for this study. For the stations, those costs are broken down in some detail in the attachments that you have. Attachment B that came with the memo packet does a breakdown of alternative for costs, although it lumps together the station cost, which would be $10 to $12 million per station, with the cost of putting in direct access ramps for the offline station access. And as far as the operations and maintenance costs long-term, we would have to reach an agreement with Caltrans to figure out what those costs would be. I don't have that number at this time because we haven't gone so far as to pick a specific alternative to discuss with them.
Understood. And if so, say we pick an alternative, we pick transit routing option, how would VTA decide to get the money to fund whatever agreement you reach with Caltrain? Would that have to come from the VTA's own general fund, or would that have to be a possible initiative in the future? How does that work?
So if VTA were to operate a transit service, that would come out of our general operating budget.
Okay.
As far as the operations and maintenance part, I would have to get back to you on that question. I'm not sure what our eligible options are.
I will mention quickly that with having an express lane as part of these options, I mean, the cost, the money rate, the revenue from the express lanes goes first to paying off the bonds for the express lanes. But then that does become money that's available within the corridor. So that is something that we could potentially tap. I don't know that we have an estimate yet as what those numbers are.
Okay. And just on that, would you have, like, based off of what you've seen with 237 and other places, would you have an estimate by the September meeting or no?
So the 2015 environmental document that looked at option 2-2 forecast between $1 million and $8 million annually to come in. Now that's a wide range, and that's because there's a lot of variance about the hours of day in which we could gain revenue by charging access. Presently, the clean vehicle allowances in the HOV lane limit the times of day when we have excess capacity to charge for to just the shoulders. So it's hard to really project how much express lane revenue there would be on hand to cover an operating cost. And that would also cover the cost of CHP enforcement of those lanes.
I see. Okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I did also want to mention in terms of cost breakdowns, there was a mention earlier of the noise strategies. So we have set aside about $10 million so that would come out of the 350 to implement noise reduction strategies.
Does the tag of 352.3 on option 3-2 include that noise abatement cost? So it's an additional cost.
Yeah.
It does not. And keep in mind that any express lane portion of that project, which would be about 133 million, which is what option 2.1 is, should be subtracted to understand how much would be funded by Measure B.
I see. Thank you for pointing that out. That's very important. And I know this is a very obvious question, but so if we create 4 stations or however many stations, they serve obviously whatever VTA wants to run, and then whatever VTA reaches an agreement or the cities reach an agreement. So for example, with Council Member Sink's point about the cities could form a JPA, would they have access to those stations? And how would that work? Would that have to be the JPA then signs an agreement with VTA, even though VTA is not directly running that service?
I'm sure we could figure something out. Any public transit service, whether VTA or municipally operated, would be welcome to use those stations.
Okay, and that would just be some kind of agreement that's negotiated. On SPLG's point, for Mr. Baker's point about private shuttle ridership, I am concerned that we don't have any data, and I understand that in the staff report it was mentioned that private companies have been reluctant to provide that data. I'm just wondering why the VTA doesn't have. Is VTA not able to? Obviously post COVID is more difficult, but prior to COVID, throughout this study, has not been able to monitor the data and just guesstimate. I don't know. Have a permit to have a VTA person out there. Whether it's on the side of the shoulder or whatever, trying to just guess at the many buses per hour throughout peak period.
I can speak to that in 2 stages. One is, and I think Adam did have this in the report, is that we are able to do counts of the shuttles, so we know how many vehicles. What we can't tell you is how many people are in there.
Yeah.
And so, so if you do that, hey, if we increase our corporate shuttles by 50%, how many cars is that? Well, that depends on how many vehicles are in there. And also look for opportunities of growth. But I will mention that actually, I think COVID is going to provide us with more of an opportunity to get that information because a lot of these private companies are actually more interested in working cooperatively. So as part of some of the recovery planning that we're doing, I've just started doing some outreach to the companies and at least seeing if we have a few companies that can help twist some arms to get that information. I can't promise you that'll happen, but that might be something we'd be looking to this PAB to talk to your own employers to, have them step up and help provide this info.
Yeah, I'd happy to, not offer my staff, but I'm happy to act as a liaison to my staff and our economic development team, as well as I'm sure many of the board members here would be happy to do that if that's something that helps also. Because, we are negotiating with businesses in our own cities on other things. And that is something we could ask for. So, and the last question is just for timeline. And I know you mentioned September for a possible vote on the final recommendation. If that were to happen in September, when would this go to the board of directors for a final vote? Or would it take several hearings at the board of directors, or how would that work after this board is finished with this project?
My sense is that we could agendize it at the very next meeting.
Okay, and so if we move this to August, perhaps, if that's the will of this board to do this by August, we could even see it a little bit sooner at the board of directors, possibly, correct?
Sure, and this is the chair of the policy advisory board bringing the recommendation to the board of directors.
Correct.
Is how that action would work.
The only caution I would offer is that because it's at the end of the summer, that oftentimes the September board meeting is very full. So whether there's an issue with getting on the agenda, maybe there isn't, but there might also be an issue with getting the board members to really focus. So I'm not trying to dissuade you one way or the other, but just something to take into account.
Well, I know one board member I used to work for that I can make sure he's focused. That concludes my questions. I'll just finish really quickly. I'm for 3-2. For the transit routing options, we obviously have two opinions that have been iterated, whether we do stations or we look at bookend stations and extend to Mountain View. I'm supportive of extending to Mountain View. And with the transit routing options, I think the question of 10 million to 12 million per station, that shaves off about 50 million if you got rid of them. But that's where I wonder about the 352.3 tag, because hopefully labor costs go down. I don't know, with everything going on with COVID and et cetera. Or maybe this doesn't last as long and then the projection, rises. But I'm willing to bet that this goes on for a while and that hopefully costs will drop eventually, whether it's a tiny bit or not. So with the stations, I think it is feasible to do them under the current budget and allocation. And you mentioned, Adam, that the 100-something million of the express lanes is taken out of that 352.3 tagline for Measure B?
Correct. So you'd be coming in around 219 for the Measure B obligation.
So the real price tag is that number. And so that's something I didn't know before. So
and I would caution you about looking at the numbers too closely. What I would suggest doing is using the numbers as a way to compare between alternatives, but don't get so solid that it's like, it actually worries me as soon as you said point something, because it's just, it can't be that accurate.
Of course.
There's no way we know what the utilities are under every location. Yeah. So to think of it more as a comparison as an absolute number.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think after the new information I got today, I'm supportive of the stations as is with either transit routing option, because I do think that we need to start circulating, like Councilmember Singh said, the working families that are struggling out there and that want to get their car off the road, because ultimately that helps regional traffic across the board. If that 100 million was included in the final price tag, I would be a little more concerned, but after hearing that, that pushes me there. So thank you, Chair.
Hey, thank you, Mason. So we have 3 more board members. Would Susan, Sean, or Marcia like to speak up? Raise your hand, please. Otherwise, oh, there we go. Sean, thank you. You're up.
Thank you. As a relative newcomer here, I may have to deal with this longer term. So some of you who are getting out of here have my respect for putting up with this for a long time. But I'm looking at maybe having to deal with it and the repercussions going into the future. So have pity on me and help us all do a good job here. A couple of comments. I really liked Mr. Singh's comments about the coming up with a better solution. Mr. Miller's comments about the environment, I think, are very important. Ms. Bruin's comments about this doesn't even have to be VTA, I think is important. And I think what most important to me, looking at this with a fresh pair of eyes, perhaps, which may not be helpful here at the end of the process, but that I wanted to bring to this, is that I do think we need to be innovative. We need to look to the future, and sticking a lane on the side of something or running a bus down the shoulder, to me, shows a real lack of imagination and a lack of innovation. Just as we look at this, as we've talked, Mr. Miller's talked about the electric vehicles and the adoption and what that's done for taking carbon out of the trips. These are changes that are ongoing, and I think we need to be looking a little more into the future. So I'm looking at this saying, how creative can we be accommodating the technologies of the future? When I look at congestion on 85 and when I look at 87 as a comparison where we have a light rail run up it, you're on 87 and you're stuck in traffic and the light rail whips by you going 40, 50, 70 miles an hour. And you say, I wish I was on that. How am I going to change my lifestyle so that I can access that? Whether I'm going to bike to a station, whether I'm going to change my job, change my housing. That's where the opportunity lies with Highway 85. What can we put down the middle where that space was dedicated that is future-proof? That's not just a lane where accidents are going to block it, where vehicles are going to pull through it. So I would like to see us visit something a little better, where we can really address this issue. I think within probably a year, we could have real autonomous buses if we have dedicated lanes for them, but they're not going to be able to interact with traffic. We could increase the speeds if we could get some serious lanes down the middle. So I would actually like to see us look into doing better. I'd like to see a 3.2, but I'd like to see those lanes split off with safety so that they are dedicated, so that the autonomous vehicles or buses could travel faster than traffic or significantly faster and be a lot better. So I'm kind of disappointed with the solutions, as I think the public is and the youth are. And I'd like to see us go back and do better. I think we do need to look at the equity issue as well, because this isn't just about people getting out of their cars or getting alternatives to their electric vehicles, which are already better alternatives to their automobiles. But we do need to look at the equity of this. I think dedicated stations are the part of the solution. And then the cities, I think, need to feed into those dedicated stations. And I think we can solve those at the city level of how we're going to get people in. It's not the last quarter mile, because we can see that there are very few cities that can make use of that last quarter mile. But how are we going to serve that so that there are shuttles that bring people in from De Anza to these dedicated stations? So I'd like to see us perhaps have a little more aggressive alternative discussed here. And I think that may be something that the public is asking for as well. So those are my thoughts on this, that I think we can do better. And I don't want to be the only person who's pushing staff to go back to the drawing board, but I think they need to go back to the drawing board and really come up with something that doesn't look like more cars and more lanes.
Thank you. Susan, would you like to make comments, or Marcia?
I thought Marcia was next.
No, I just asked those you three. So if you're ready, we'd love to have you speak.
Okay, I don't know if Marcia wanted to go first.
I don't see her, but if
Okay.
you're ready, please.
I'm ready. Okay. So thank you for all the work. Unfortunately, it got to us pretty late. The city of Cupertino and other cities signed on to a letter dated June 11th, basically saying that we were disappointed that this information came out late, and that there was insufficient demand to support a transit project down the corridor, that the overall analysis failed to adequately consider the impact of private high-capacity bus shuttles, which several of the previous speakers mentioned. Also about the money as it relates to potential bicycle or congestion. Other aspects of related to the corridor are not in Measure B. And the timing of this, again, was late in the game. We were scrambling to even try to get the letter written and then for us to review it. I haven't had a chance to talk to anybody else about it in the city other than a little bit. Okay, so that's the starting point. Of all the solutions, I would say 3.2 is getting there, but I don't think it's there yet. So I would agree with with Sean about we need another alternative. So starting with 3.2, I'm curious why the transit lane doesn't go south of 87 to South 101. Because when I get on here in Campbell and I head south, when I hit 87, I'm more backed up than I am further up north up the line. So it seems like the 87 to 101 piece should have an extra transit if you are going to do the other two sections. Regarding the routing, the transit routing options, option 1 is to have a new inline freeway station at Bascom. All that really would do is connect to Samaritan Hospital, and the hospital itself is not generating a tremendous amount of traffic. It may serve the future of North 40 project, but to head it towards Campbell, that station in itself, one, the right of way isn't that wide. So how do you add this inline plus an extra lane? I don't know that you can do both of those. And then the other one about routing option 2, where it says new direct ramp to Good Samaritan Hospital. Again, the amount of people that are going to the hospital is fairly small, considering the amount of people that would either potentially use a Bascom inline freeway station. But once you do that, where's the room? You add this transit lane, how can you add another inline freeway station? I don't see the room for that. I'm not hugely supportive of adding a lane, but if we did, it would be leaning towards the 3.2, but what happens south of 87? The other part of this, let me go back to my notes here. So you guys know I'm a landscape architect. I'm working with architects. And right now, the whole business, architect, and development community is reevaluating how buildings are going to be designed. Are we going to continue with this super high density developments when now people are working at home? A couple of the big businesses, I think Apple's one of them, has said, you can work from home now for the next year. So if we have another big outbreak next fall, who's going to say that these businesses aren't going to say, okay, I only want half of my employees to report to the physical office, and I want the other half to be working from home? And there's already been a discussion of how many people then are going to move out of the area and move to another state, even if they can do everything by telecommuting and flying into town once or twice a month. So I think we need to be reevaluating this in the potential of how is the whole rest of the architecture, design, development community reevaluating what's going on? In 2 to 3 years, are we still going to have this super high demand? If every single business says, okay, half of my employees don't need to come to the actual physical office. So I'm not seeing anything here about how what's happened in the last 4 months is changing as we move forward. So I think that's my comments.
Thank you, Susan. Susan, just to answer a quick question, Adam helped me out. The reason you don't see a lane down 87 is because light rail's already taken up space that would normally be in the medium. That doesn't happen north of 87.
Okay, well, the way it shows it on the diagram, it shows as if there's a shoulder or a median. Because up above on the, what is it? Alternative 2.1 shows a median going down past 87, the section of 87 and 101. the beige band says it still has a median.
Go ahead, Adam.
The diagram is not to scale, and member McAllister is correct that the light rail is already in the median between Highway 87 and 101 in South San Jose, so that transit connection is already there.
So there's no room to widen on Highway 85 from 87 to 101.
We just couldn't figure out a way to fit it in without some serious right-of-way impacts.
Because that's just as congested. If you head home and you pass here where 280 or where 17 is, you're stuck all the way to 101 in pretty much solid traffic the whole way down. So adding an express or adding in 3.2 where you add this transit lane, then it just ends. It just seems like you're going to create more of a bottleneck down that end.
So I will add to that comment is that, so the idea is that the transit lane would connect to the light rail system. And so obviously your hope is that people will continue to take transit down and it'll increase the overall transit ridership in that alternative. I do also want to, and please, Adam, correct me if I'm incorrect, but the express lane, keep in mind, is not an added lane. That's a conversion of the HOV lane. So the express lane alternative, or that one express lane, is not a widening.
Right, on 3.2, what is now the HOV becomes an express lane, but you're adding a transit lane in the first two sections.
Correct.
And I'll make a comment, I forget who said something about you're on 87 and your stop and go and the light rail goes whizzing by. I used to live down off of Snell and I used to ride the light rail. First I tried commuting, that sucked. Then I tried riding the light rail, and it actually took longer because you had to stop at every stop. So maybe between stops you're going fast, but it took me about an extra 15 minutes riding the light rail than it did actually driving. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Susan.
I'm sorry, John, I did want to mention one more point that I neglected to mention, is that the Measure B actually limits our analysis between from 87 north. So that's part of the Measure B language.
Oh, okay. Good to know. Thank you.
Marcia, thank you for hanging in there, and it's your opportunity.
I really wasn't intending to talk. In the interest of time, we signed on to the letter, and that's our position.
Oh, thanks. Okay. So Marcia, did you guys like 3.2? Or what, did you have a preference on?
We really thought that the analysis was lacking, more work needed to be done. I don't know that we have a stated preference right now. We await other analysis, frankly. Okay.
And has your staff conveyed those other analysis to VTA?
I believe that our Director of Parks and Public Works has been in contact with various staff members. So I believe there's ongoing discussions about what our position is.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. We did run a little over, but it's with this COVID-19, I don't know about your city, but our city is getting a lot more public comment. So have the extra time to get involved and see what we're doing. So for staff, maybe our next meeting, if COVID-19 is going on, we might want to schedule in a longer time for public comment, because this is an important topic and we do want transparency to Rod Sink's point of view.
John,
I had a couple of questions.
When's that next meeting?
Yeah,
let's do it. Make it through my comments, and then Adam said he's compiling our ask list, and so let's give him an opportunity to have all the thoughts in there. So the city of Mountain View, that's well spoken. I'll go straight off and say 3.2. From the very beginning, I always thought a dedicated transit lane was the solution. Sean, what the dedicated transit lane does is reserve real estate. So if nothing else, we get a right of way, and that's very important for the future, depending on what we put into that lane. But we need to get it set aside now when we have the money, and technology will come down the line. To Howard's point, I have a question. when does the clean vehicles decal go away? I understand that's to be sunset in the next year or two. So does anybody have an answer on that one?
I'm pretty sure that's 2025.
2025. Okay. Just in time when our dedicated transit lane comes through. But to the environment, Howard did mention that the city and the state has or feds have a requirement that to go to zero emission buses. VTA is in the process of buying those buses. And yes, it got a little bit diverted to East Ridge Light Rail. So it's interesting that new technology had to give up some of its funding temporarily for old transportation. So that was something that was interesting.
John, could I make a quick comment on that?
Yeah.
Part of you're not incorrect, but part of the reason for that decision was also that there's currently so few bus manufacturers that make electric buses that they were not going to be able to fill our order anytime soon. And so what we really need is the industry to step up and get more manufacturing happening.
Well, you know, if I'm waving money in my hand, people will start coming. So yes, you're right. Thank you for that clarification. So I did hear 3.2 consistently. Another interesting point that I like to bring up is a lot of people were talking about connected stations. And to Member Bruin's point is, let's look at what's a strategic point of stations, because when we had this discussion last year and Adam and Chris had their flow chart or heat chart, the majority of it was throughput. It wasn't the local traffic that was causing the congestion, if I understand. It was the traffic going from one point of south, like down at 101 South, all the way to the north. And that's where we were getting to congestion. And that's what we're going to try to resolve, is getting that through traffic going through there. And then we would have to rely on VTA or local cities to do their own transportation to tie in to the various stations. So just putting a station there, and I know staff is very hesitant to say, let's put a station there until we get some data. But I think if we look strategically on where those stations come about, because that would actually be building for the future. But just because you put a station in at, say, Saratoga, nothing ever since Saratoga on the freeway, means that they're going to go north to Mountain View Service District. So that's one thought. The comment that Mason asked about, could other operating systems use VTA stations or pickup points? And Mountain View is in agreement with them. We have a shuttle that they share the same bus stops. So that's there. Also, Mountain View has a TMA, which is Transit Management Association, that once traffic or the shuttle gets to a destination, like say North Bayshore, then they would be responsible for the last mile to distribute to people. Again, when I talked to Apple and I talked to Google, speed is of the essence. And I think that's always been one of our points of trying to reduce or incentivize people to get on these shuttles, is to get the minimum transfers, minimum time, maximum speed. I think staff has gotten quite a bit of input to move forward, to clarify, the stations, clarify the endpoint, clarify the data of the private shuttles, even though we do know how many buses are going through there. Also, there were many points about that you're using current analysis versus potential analysis down the line. Let's see what else we came about.
How does COVID-19 changing the design and location of people working?
Well, that's Susan, that's a great point, but I think we need to give it till the fall to see if it kicks in again. But that should be an absolute consideration that goes in there. Vehicle miles travels, I hear a lot of people talking about that, and the greenhouse gas reduction. So anything, I think that the transit what if we do with the transit lanes, we do get people out of their cars, and that definitely, in conjunction with getting people out of their cars with the electric buses, will definitely help the environment. I think I've rambled on enough. I think staff has enough to get going. If there's something that I missed, but I think everybody had an opportunity to speak. I will work with my co-chair, Howard, and we'll work with VTA to say, once Adam's had a chance to, and Deborah had a chance to digest what they've heard, that we sit down and we can start planning what's a realistic timeline that we can hold everybody accountable to meet again. So does that sound fair to everybody? I see Rod Sinks has a hand up.
Yeah, with all due respect, we do have a lot of questions, but I find in this circumstance where we have new board members that are rotating in that don't have as much experience, I found the Brown Act particularly cumbersome because we can't all be talking with each other outside of public meetings. So my request for you to entertain is, with as much data as you can, could we have another follow-up session with or without any new input from VTA? I mean, Jason's offering to help, which is a step forward, I think. Could we have a meeting in say mid-July, poll for something there where we could continue this discussion? I would point out this meeting is scheduled to go until 4:30.
Was it? I thought it was 3 o'clock. I'm sorry.
4.
Yeah. So
Adam, what time?
Well, the Zoom call is 4:30 in my calendar. Okay, but I think we need.
Well, then,
in order to corral us so that we can actually get to a consensus, I think we're going to need more time. And I think what a month would do for us is give us time to digest what's been presented today. So we don't necessarily need Adam Berger to go, boil the ocean some more. But I'm really concerned we're going to run out of time to develop that consensus. And I have no problem having that discussion with you all in public because, that is the transparency we need. I could make just a couple more points if you'd allow me to that I missed the first time. So, to Sean's point of innovation, I really appreciated him. I don't know you, Sean, and I haven't talked to you, but I think this idea that we should do what it takes to accommodate, for example, autonomous high-capacity vehicles, the early ones, right? And for them, they may not be able to tolerate cars in the lane. I think that's okay if we're really trying to make something happen here, something on the order of what Mountain View has proposed to move riders to North Bayshore, where there is a dedicated and that place is separated, can't be everywhere because the buses do need to be able to go get on at exits and wherever, right? This is a many-to-many solution, as we've talked about. I think we ought to think about that. And then I missed earlier my thoughts on Mountain View and Sunnyvale. I think these cities know best what's going to work for them. But I would point out that from the point of view from your friends to the south, I really like the idea of having connection to the copious bus service on El Camino. I think being able to load and unload there to get to your wonderful city centers in Mountain View and Sunnyvale would be my idea of a good time. I think it also has to figure out how to most efficiently get to Caltrain. Caltrain is the one really valuable major transit connection that gets us north-south. If we can do that well and time efficiently, I'm not trying to propose a solution or topology, but I think we need to do that. And then I agree with you all that, since a primary purpose of this is getting people to commute more efficiently and electing this choice over picking their own cars, it's got to figure out how to load and unload at some key point at the very north end of this, right? That serves, I think, both Mountain View and Sunnyvale, and for me, right? Yes, businesses. That's why I want a station in Cupertino, so we can serve these major employment centers and do that really well with local service. So if we've recently started the Via Shuttle program. Before COVID, we were seeing very promising ridership. One of the most promising of all of the stops was the Sunnyvale Caltrain station. So we know there's demand. We know people are willing to ride a bike for a mile or so to get to a station. We know they're willing to walk. And I think what this time is teaching us is that I think people are looking for alternatives. And initially they're going to be very nervous. But we know this traffic is somehow and by some means going to come back as fierce as ever. And so I think, to the point of how things are going to change, we really have to be looking for those long-term solutions. We know that, if all we do is replace all of the cars on the road with EVs, to Howard's point, we know we could reduce a major portion of the greenhouse gases we haven't through Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and he's our chair this year. But what it won't do is provide us any substantial additional capacity in the corridor. And that's the thing that will get the traffic off of our surface streets. Thank you.
Just for clarity, I guess we were scheduled to go to 4 o'clock. So I was looking at a staff report and it gave us different time. So we do have scheduled extra time. So thank you. We'll go to Jeannie Bruins next.
Thank you. Given that I spoke first, I thought I'd like to comment based on some of the stuff I've heard. So there's a few things. One is, we can do analysis paralysis, and the more time we have in between, the more turnover we have in terms of the policy advisory board players, et cetera. And we're gonna end up with nothing gonna happen in my lifetime. Okay, maybe you guys are all a lot younger than I am. But I think there comes a time where we have to be somewhat pragmatic to this. So I look at this and saying, we've got a real window of opportunity. I think we've got to get this we got to get something to the VTA board well before December. And that was the date that I put as October. Whether it's September, I think Deborah's comment is very valid in terms of how much is available in that agenda. But I think we need to put a statement down of where we want to go, because we need as a body to figure out how we take advantage of these types of meetings. We have these meetings, the clock runs out, and what we have is a bunch of individual opinions, myself included in all that. But what we're not investing in is that ability to converge. And how do we converge? And what are we going to converge on? You got to understand, in the 9 Bay Area counties, there's a lot of express lanes being built. There's a lot of funding dollars that are going to be trying to figure out, and everybody maneuvering where those dollars are going, right? When you look at Santa Clara County, you bring it back to home, you've got Santa Clara County as the only county in the 9 Bay Area counties that is looking at potentially doing dual express lanes, okay? We're sitting here saying we don't want a dual express lane, okay? We want one of those to be a transit lane. I think we kind of are converging on that. But while we don't converge on all the details, the other place where there's going to be dual express lanes, okay, and VTA is probably cringing as I'm opening up my mouth here, okay, is the 101 corridor. The longer we take to converge, the more we go in and trying to make this into something really huge and grand versus trying to figure out an effective first step so we can get moving. The 101 corridor is going to get, I'll tell you, it will get prioritized over this corridor. So how long do we want to wait? I think the incentive is here for us to figure out how to come together. I don't care what we're going to come together on, but we need to look at this. We need to have an eye for some of the future. I think, staff right now, what we end up doing is at the end of this meeting is we ask staff to go off and do all these one-off things. So hopefully Adam can try and figure out how do we get to where we want to go. But I think it's a miracle for him to be able to do that. I think it's unfair to ask him to do that. So I hear us all looking at 3.2. I think we've not commented on whether it's option 1 or option 2 in terms of the station, or what I was saying is an option 3, which is maybe it's not all those stations. Maybe we figure out either can we go to 0 in between, or do we go to the 1 or 2 critical? Maybe the ask of staff is to figure out, give us something that is less than that. It can, based on some of the data and what we know, because without the data as a board, I don't have the vote. John McAllister has it for my part. You know what? If you don't have the data to support these dreams, we're going to be in trouble as well. So we got to balance these things out. So I would like to see us get together, short order, not necessarily as Rod just said, with a lot more data from VTA, but it's time for us to have a discussion and how do we convince ourselves what are the critical things that we need to do and what are the things that we don't want to preclude from happening down the road, because I'm telling you, it ain't going to be all built in one fell swoop. Whether you have 1 station, 0 stations, 2, just the bookends with Mason's comment, it ain't going to be built in one fell swoop. So let's try and get focused in the next meeting where we can roll up our sleeves and really talk with one another. And I would say, John, I would even ask that we look at having public comments all at one point in time so that we have the maximum time for us to truly deliberate.
Okay, thank you.
October's not that far away.
Okay, we'll go to the vice chair.
Sure, to Jeannie's point, 3.2, plus in my city, stopping at West Valley College, including the analysis of corporate shuttles, but we don't have to get every last rider in those shuttles, because having worked at one of those companies, other than the first and last shuttle, they're virtually all completely full. So I'm not too super worried about us being precise there. But Jeannie, you said analysis paralysis, and we've been there for way too long already. So I propose we meet once in July, twice in August, and once in September, and we commit ourselves to being done so that this can go to the board at the first meeting in October. I don't know any more direct way to do it. Every time we sit down in this meeting, there's some set of new people that say, oh, I'm new. Maybe we should think bigger. We should think different. We should try and redo what's now 3+ years of work. And I mean, the big deal here, the big picture, 300,000 or whatever it was, that was talked about as being a down payment on what we would ultimately do in the corridor. It wasn't like the definitive only money ever. We talked about reserving the space for transit and how that will evolve over time, autonomous buses. Trust me, we're not going to be deploying, no offense to those board members at VTA or staff. VTA is not an organization that could, for starting today, deploy autonomous buses in a year, right? But if we reserve the space for transit, as those things come available and come online over time, it will be for transit. The other alternative was to let it become a car lane. And I get it. A car lane is worth 33,000 cars a day. And that's more than our entire light rail system carries a day. That doesn't seem like the right answer for other issues beyond just base ridership. So our goal should be to reserve this for transit, get a proposal on the table that lets us get moving. And if it takes 4 more meetings before we can close, let's go July, 2 in August, and 1 in September. Come on, guys, we can't keep restarting this and going over and over again, or all of us are going to be gone, and Susan will be leading the effort. Sorry, Susan, you're just on my screen.
Here, here. I like that, Howard.
What?
Okay.
What are you getting me into?
Okay, Mason, you're up.
Yeah, very short. So I'm fine with however we get there. What I would propose is whether it's July or August, we have one meeting where staff has clearly heard 3-2, and we've heard 3 options for the transit routing options, and we narrow the transit routing option down to 1. Or at least we provide input on which option is preferable, and we have all the relevant data that is collected by then, and board members can email staff in the meantime to say what data they want at that meeting. And then at the last meeting, we vote on the final alternative. I can't speak for Larry because he's the main voting delegate here, but I have gotten the short end of the stick. So I've attended the last 3 meetings, and I imagine I will attend the next 2. So that's why I wouldn't personally want 4 meetings, but I would rather have 2 meetings that are very efficient. So thank you.
So Adam, I got to see no other hands. So I get 3.2 seems to be the general direction. The one issue that seems to be coming up is the stations. I hear myself, Jeannie, Johnny, and I can't recall if somebody else, were flexible on the stations and number. I know Rod was pretty succinct about stations. Susan, I thought I heard something along that line. Marcia was neutral on it. Mason said he wanted to see something along those lines.
I just to chime in, I didn't say I completely support 3.2. I said of all of the ones, that's the one getting the closest, and that the stations are an issue. So it's not there yet from my perspective.
Well, but see, my job is to sort of start getting us in a direction. And when there's 9 cities, and when I see 5 votes, just like your city council, I say, okay, we're moving in that direction. So that's why I sort of summarized it that way. So Adam, what was your take on when we were talking about the stations? Did you hear a little too many one-offs, like as Jeannie said, and so that we can start narrowing the focus, because we need to, as everybody said. So what was your take on the stations?
So maybe to speak to some of the last several comments provided by Policy Advisory Board members, we don't need to figure out perfection at this stage in the project. If we look ahead, let's say the Policy Advisory Board pushes a transit lane alternative as their recommendation and the Board of Directors accepts it, then we will move into a project phase, which will have a great deal of engineering analysis. It'll then move into environmental analysis. Those are the moments that are much more serious. Right now, we're just doing a study to see what direction we want to go in. And in the future, we'll have the opportunity to refine some of these things, whether the station is at Saratoga or at West Valley College. So we don't need the Policy Advisory Board to give us exactly 3.2, but we do need a push in the preferred direction. And that direction could be a Frankenstein type project that borrows bits and pieces that we like from different alternatives and says, here, staff, move forward and try to do something that is true to this vision. So that's what I would advise the Policy Advisory Board to work toward.
So Deborah, you're going to have to, with Adam, write up this final report. And even though the PAB will make a recommendation, you will have some background information to it. To Adam's point, that if we go, and I'm sensing the dedicated transit lane going forward, is that in essence just that's really all you need, and that the board, the VTA board, will then take the information that you have and say, okay, if we're going to put something in there that's viable, that does get some transit, these are where you would put them?
Correct. I would say I think I probably need to wrap my head around this more. I think there probably is a value of having one more meeting before the September PAB, because there is some additional information we can look at and bring back to you. I guess what I would advise the PAB is be less worried about fine tuning the report in every aspect, as what Adam said, is think about what the general recommendation is. And I'm glad Adam said that, because that's actually a really good point, is you have to go into project definition. You have to go into the environmental analysis with real alternatives. It is not a sufficient environmental process if you think or state that all those decisions have been made. You also have the opportunity at that point to do much more detailed, both cost estimating, travel demand forecasting. By the time we get to that point, COVID will have hopefully come and gone, and we'll start to see what the ongoing kind of interactions are with the travel behavior as a result of that. So, I think there's a lot we don't have to do right now predicting the future when we're in an uncertain time, and that's actually a benefit. But I also think, my gut reaction is it actually helps at this point to identify what those uncertainties are, and that helps you frame what that next step is and what has to be addressed.
Yeah, Deborah, I'll also add that one of the other factors that we haven't discussed today is that this is a Caltrans facility. And so we're going to need Caltrans approval. And part of going through the project definition and environmental analysis will be making sure that Caltrans is okay with us pitching these changes to their facility. I think they've been listening patiently on the meeting today. We haven't forgotten about them. And so that'll also be a factor we encounter down the line.
Nick, did you want to respond to that?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I think this is a great meeting, actually. Thanks, Adam, for bringing Caltrans to the table. I do actually, I do agree with Adams and then also with the Ms. Burns about, at the end of the day, it's all going to boil out into a specific project. And that project usually it should address a purpose and need. So I think we go back to the same discussion early on. Any project within the state right of way, it has to carry some kind of elements of what we're trying to fix, and as much as we specific to the purpose and need of the project, of identify the problem and what we need to fix, then I think everything it falls in perspective. So I do agree. I think there is a process after the recommendation. It does have that we know at least the footprint or roadmap where we're going as a team, and it's within Caltrans right of way, which is throughout the corridor of 85. We do need start of sort of a project, separate project, and the project would go with all the full elements of it, which is from engineering study, project study report, into environmental document, into more engineering design down there. So I agree early on, and I think it's that's why I was listening patiently about this one, and I think we'll be part of this team, and hopefully we'll move forward faster. But I think the key is to know what is the project is and what alternative we're going to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. So for those who didn't know who was, second, Rod, Nick is with Caltrain, and so Caltrans, so that's why we brought him along. I just wanted to.
Can we have his contact information?
I believe we'll be able to get that. If
yeah, I would really appreciate being able to have those conversations, or having my staff have those conversations. So.
Yeah, I will say, I'm sure your staff has his contact information, but we can have the board office send that out. And just, I did want to clarify in case people didn't hear it, Nick is with Caltrans, not Caltrain.
Yeah,
thank you.
I did say that. I did.
We love you all.
So Adam, here's Deborah, here's a concern that I have is we'll go through this meeting, we'll come up with a recommendation, and then Caltran will say no. And then you're going to start all over with a whole new policy advisory board, potentially. What are the chances of a preliminary response from Caltran to our proposal of a dedicated transit lane within a month?
Well, so I wouldn't put a time frame on it, and I'm not going to put Nick on the spot, but I would say that's a conversation we can have offline with Caltrans.
Okay.
Nick, I will let you speak to it though.
Yeah, well, thanks, Deborah. Actually, John, I mean, Caltrans actually sit in that in the board of this meeting as a non-voting member. I do actually, my district director who sits in this, but I am an alternate member. So I am very familiar with most of your staff and the region. But I think it's great to be part of that understanding. If there is any issues with any alternatives that we will raise, we will not hesitate to bring it up as an advisory to help the team. But again, and you know, the devil in the details, a lot of stuff that we know. So until we have a project, we all know will bring different expertise to the table to understand the scope. But Caltrans is available for any advisory review or comments to help the committee decide.
Okay. Member Bruins, comments?
Yeah, just, you know what I think would help most of us is a real understanding of what needs to go to the VTA board. When does it need to go? Okay. Because we've been talking about trying to get something where we can kind of wrap this part up and have this preferred alternative and taking that to get that decision because we've invested a lot of time here. But what is that? Because you know what, I've been on the board for a while. To go in with something and just say, okay, well, we have this report, but we have this recommendation from the Policy Advisory Board, and the report doesn't support that, doesn't help either. So I think when we look at all the stuff that we talked about here, what actually is new information where we want to re-look at what we have? Because if we just accept the document as it is, and I shift over and pretend I'm John McAllister, which I'm not, okay, but I would sit here and as a board member, scratch my head in terms of, wait a minute, is this wishful thinking? Is this, asking for a unicorn when there's no data? So I think this is why, to me, I don't want to rush to get something to the board where we don't have something behind it. But if the analysis needs to shift or something, I think we need a clear understanding so that it'll help shape us in our next meeting.
Right. So what I would caution is, I don't think we need to worry about, unless there's something hugely contradictory, but think about the report that's in front of you as kind of a chapter in the whole story, and that what we don't have in front of you is a documentation of the recommendation and the supporting reasons why. So that's not in the story yet, nor should it be in it yet. One of the things that we can do, I don't have the full answer, but that we can do prior to, if we meet again, say in August, which it sounded like that's where I was hearing this going, is that something we could bring to you is exactly that kind of that answer as to what's the process, what needs to be in it, what are we presenting to the board?
Yeah, when do you think we should be trying to get something to the board? Again, I think, speaking for several of us, we're terming out. And we would rather do it sooner rather than later. Otherwise, we're going to start another 3 years of.
Well, okay, so I will say, and I'm being agnostic as to what the timing is and who's involved in which decision. I think the timing that you have in front of you right now is workable, which is, let's have another working session in August. Let's have the next regularly scheduled PAB meeting in September, whether that means the October or November board meeting. And we can work with the board secretary's office to figure out how that timing really works. But I think given what was just said about what you want to take to the board, that sounds much more reasonable. What I would have been concerned about going to the board in the next year is if you were going that next step and really getting into what is the service being provided? What is the technology? How do we include innovative solutions? Are we getting into details on exactly where the stations are and how, that ends up being a whole lot more. But now that it feels like we've pulled back into what is the alternative and what are the recommendations? And maybe even we end up with 1, 2, or 3 options. I think that's that's still well defined. It's not just a big picture throwing it over to the board. So I think that sounds like it's doable. Now, obviously I'm speaking for the PAB, and you all need to decide whether what that develops into is what you're comfortable recommending.
But for us, so John, just so I agree, you have to talk with the board secretary's office, but experience says if you want something on the agenda in October, it's got to go through the respective committees in September. So if we're meeting in September, you're going to be missing the September, whatever, groups it needs to go through before it comes to the board. Very few, most things go through a committee, at least one committee. It'll probably go through the congestion management committee.
Yeah, and so we'll look into that and get back to you. Nobody can tell I'm looking at the board secretary tile on my screen. That's always the thing with Zooms. You look where people are on the screen. I honestly don't know if a PAB recommendation goes through the same process. So we will look into that and get back.
Yeah, so if you could do that, because I think, Rod said maybe we need a meeting in July, 2 in August, and then a September or something. I can't remember what he said, but John, if you can work to try and figure out how do we get the discussion. I'm a little concerned if we push the discussion off till August, because it's kind of fresh in our minds now. And we all just, I'm sorry, I have to go back and reset and relook at notes and such. I'd rather be more efficient.
So the comment I'll make on schedule, and I'm very sensitive to a number of you made the comment, and I take it at its face about wanting more time to look at the report, and I completely understand that. If we were to meet again in July, which we can make work, I would characterize that as we might have a few more answers that we can get to you, but nothing in depth. And because anything we'd want to get to you, we'd want to get more than a week in advance. Well, how much can we do in 2 weeks? So I think a July meeting might be more of a, let's keep up the discussion of what we're talking about now. And we can identify some other items such as, the understanding of the process. What might this look like? But I would, and I'm looking at Adam to agree or disagree, but I would want to wait till August until we had any additional, even potential data or research that we could show you.
Yeah, this is Rod, and I'll just add that, it was Howard that made the suggestion. But I think, if we settle on some compromise, if we do have a follow-on discussion in July, you happen to have more information, great. But if you don't, what I feel great about coming out of this meeting is it seems like we have consensus of a majority on 3-2. And then what we're also hearing is we don't have to have a specific recommendation about all the stations and their locations. But I think, especially in this time, some transparency, thoughtful input from members of the public who actually know something in this domain, right, as well as our city staffs. I think we can have a better conversation that will help shape things. And you'll give us whatever little input additional you have, and then we do it again in August, and then we, by then in August, we're ready for a recommendation. I don't know, but that might allow us to go through whatever other committees we have to. But my guess is you could at least tell us, you could help us with the end game scheduling if we met, say, a month from now. Right. Is that fair? You could tell us what committees this is going to have to blend its way through to make it to the end.
Yeah, and that's what I would say. In about a month's time, I think we could pull together some information, not that we'd get to you in advance, that would help advance this discussion of what these sub options are. We could talk to you more about what the process is and what the next steps might look like. And
whether, does the PAB have a continuance after recommendation of the board to go look at the details, or are we basically done having done high level stuff?
Yeah, and my understanding, Adam, you might know this better than I do, is that the PAB would continue even if it was because the noise analysis, we're just putting the RFP out, is for the 85 corridor, so that's under the PAB's purview. There might be a point in time where you don't meet as often, but.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's correct.
I really appreciate it. Really appreciate today. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to wrap this up. We were pretty much ending on time, considering we had a lot of input and so forth, and that's what we needed, to get some input. I'm going to chat with my vice chair and get with staff to just sort of talk about some things, and maybe we can answer a lot of the questions with a memo of how the next process is going out so that you're informed. And that way expectations are addressed a little bit, and maybe we can put in some generic questions in there that to think about, so that when we do meet again, that we sort of have a little bit of a game plan, summary of what happened today. So we sort of just go, here's what we're trying to do and what we are expected to do. I know VTA goes dark in July, so I don't know if they're real thrilled about having a meeting as a group, but I think we can still have a chat with someone's going to say something there.
Yeah, the board secretary here. We will conduct polling for July and August meetings.
Okay.
We do need people to respond to that polling so that we can pick a date. If people don't respond, we can't pick a date. I will try to get that out today or tomorrow morning, so if people can be on the lookout for it and respond by the end of the week, so we can clear dates that people might put on hold on their calendar, that would be helpful. If you guys want to meet in, July and then August as well. So it's kind of up to the PAB to respond to the polling so that we can get the date in there.
Yes, thank you. That's always great. If we get the dates, we can cancel, but at least if we get it on, then it's not VTA canceling, it's us. So that's why it's very important to respond.
So diplomatically put.
Yes. But I say, my vice chair and I will follow up and see what we can do. We have another item, number 5. Was there any announcements from anybody? Hearing none, I will go right into, before I say it, thank you, staff. Thank you for city staff for participating. Thank you for VTA to reaching out to city staff and getting their input before we even got to this meeting to allow them to participate, because to me, they're our second line of expertise after VTA. And so thank staff for saying, and I see my Mountain View staff still hanging on there. Of course, they would feel guilty if they left. But I appreciate everybody getting their staffs involved. I think that was the best way to do it, because I think it did hopefully alleviate some concerns. But I think going forward, I think this is some technical stuff. So if staff still continue to reach out to our city staff, would be excellent, because then it would make all of our lives a little easier and help us get a better understanding. for the cities of Montecito and Campbell. Maybe we can help you guys with the VTA could reach out a little bit more to help you guys get up to speed a little bit of what's been taking place, because it has been a 5-year process. And so everything that we can do when we come back and we're fully informed will make us be efficient and effective as we finish up our last parts. So I will adjourn. Thank you, everybody. Make sure you do the polling. If you don't, I will call you the next day without a Brown Act. Thank you all. Have a great evening.